The staging ground, designated Firebase Adamant, sat on a barren moon orbiting Metallica's fourth planet, a position chosen for its strategic value in controlling approach vectors to the Forge world. What the Inner Sphere forces found there shattered any remaining illusions about the scale of warfare in the 42nd Millennium. The Imperial Guard had deployed the 23rd Cadian Armored Regiment, 5,000 soldiers, 200 battle tanks, and support vehicles that would have dwarfed entire military operations in the Inner Sphere. The tanks themselves were mobile fortresses called Leman Russ, each one mounting cannons that could punch through building-thick armor and armed with enough firepower to reduce a city block to rubble. The soldiers moved with the grim efficiency of troops who had seen too many friends die and expected to join them soon. Colonel Sarah Davion stood in the command center, a prefabricated structure that had been dropped from orbit and assembled in under 6 hours, and studied the tactical displays with growing unease. Commandant Steiner was beside her, along with Con Ward, who had insisted on commanding from the front rather than his dropship. Around them, Imperial officers moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating defensive positions and assault vectors with the casual competence of people who had been fighting for their entire lives. Your forces will deploy here, Sector 7 Gamma. The voice belonged to Lord Colonel Arvin Kestis, commander of the 23rd Cadian. He was an older man, his face bearing the scars of a lifetime of warfare. His left arm replaced with a crude augmetic that whirred when he moved. He pointed to a section of the tactical display showing a narrow valley between two ridgelines. You'll provide mobile fire support for our armor. Your battle mechs will engage targets of opportunity while our Leman Russ provide the main battle line. Con Ward studied the deployment for 10 seconds before shaking his head. That's a kill box. Those ridgelines provide no cover for withdrawal and channel movement directly into enemy fire lanes. If we deploy there and the enemy has any tactical sense, they'll flank us through. He pointed to a ravine system barely visible on the display. Here, cutting off our retreat and surrounding us. Lord Colonel Kestis's expression didn't change. That's correct. It's a kill box for whoever occupies it. That's why we're putting your battle mechs there, to draw the Death Guard into committing their forces. Once they engage, our armor will execute a pincer movement from these continue 1148 positions. He indicated 2 concealed deployment zones and crush them against your position. You're using us as bait, Colonel Davion said flatly. I'm using untested assets in a role where their loss is acceptable. Kestis met her gaze without apology. Welcome to Imperial Guard doctrine, Colonel. Every soldier is ammunition to be expended in the Emperor's name. The question isn't whether you'll take casualties. It's whether you'll take enough enemy with you to justify the expenditure. Can your battle mechs hold that position for 20 minutes under sustained assault from Chaos Space Marines? 20 minutes? Commandant Steiner's voice carried disbelief. That's all? What happens after 20 minutes? Either you've broken their assault and survived, or you're all dead and we execute the pincer without you. Kestis pulled up casualty projections that made the Inner Sphere officer's blood run cold. Imperial Guard Standard Doctrine projects 70% casualties for forces holding fixed positions against Chaos Space Marine assault. Your battle mechs might improve those odds to 50% if you're as good as you claim. The Emperor protects, Colonel, but he expects us to pull our own weight first. Con Ward's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to think tactically rather than react emotionally. What assets do we have for support? Artillery, air cover, orbital fire. Artillery will be pre-positioned here and here. Kestis highlighted positions 3 kilometers behind the proposed battle mech deployment. Basilisk mobile artillery platforms, effective range 40 kilometers. They'll provide suppressing fire on approach vectors. But once the Death Guard close to melee range, artillery becomes useless. Too much risk of friendly fire. As for air cover, he pulled up orbital scans showing contaminated atmosphere. The Death Guard bring their own weather. Plague clouds, toxic fog, viral atmospherics that corrode fighter engines in minutes. Air support is compromised until we can push their corruption back. And orbital fire? Colonel Davion pressed. Kestis actually smiled, a grim expression devoid of humor. If things go that badly wrong, the Forge world will lance the entire valley from orbit with plasma bombardment. You'll have approximately 60 seconds warning via Voxcast. Use it to make peace with the Emperor, because nothing survives lance strikes. Not you, not the Death Guard, not the ground you're standing on. The silence that followed was broken by a new voice, one that carried unquestionable authority despite speaking barely above a whisper. The Lord Colonel's assessment is accurate, but incomplete. Everyone turned to see Inquisitor Cassius Valen entering the command center, his black armor somehow darker than the shadows around him. Behind him walked two figures that made even the hardened Cadian guardsmen take a step back. A combat servitor, 8 feet tall with both arms replaced by heavy bolters, and a woman in crimson power armor marked with the symbols of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. Her face was serene, but her eyes burned with absolute faith that bordered on madness. The Death Guard are not conventional enemies. Valen continued, his augmetic eyes sweeping the room. They are heretic Astartes, traitors space marines who betrayed the Emperor 10,000 years ago. Each one is worth 100 normal soldiers. They feel no fear, no doubt, and cannot be reasoned with. Worse, they carry the Plague Father's gifts. Diseases that can liquefy organs in seconds, rot armor off your frames, and turn your own troops into plague zombies. Your battle mech's sealed cockpits may protect you from airborne contagions, but one breach, one crack in your armor, and you'll die screaming as your flesh turns to slime. Star Captain Marissa had joined the briefing along with 3 other mech warriors, all veterans of the heaviest fighting in the clan wars. She spoke with the absolute confidence of a warrior who had never backed down from a challenge. Inquisitor, we appreciate the warning, but we've fought in vacuum, in toxic atmospheres, through chemical weapons and urban warfare that would make your guardsmen weep. Our mechs are built to survive anything short of direct fusion weapon hits. If these Death Guard want to fight us, we'll show them what Clan Wolf honor looks like. The Sister of Battle turned to regard Marissa with eyes that seemed to see into her soul. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute faith. I am Sister Superior Celestine of the Order of the Sacred Rose. I have fought the Death Guard for 70 years. I have seen their plagues reduce entire regiments to rotting corpses in hours. I have watched warriors braver than you collapse as their lungs filled with bile. And I have prayed over the mass graves of those who thought their armor and courage would be enough. She stepped closer, and Marissa could feel the heat of her absolute conviction. Your confidence is admirable. Your faith is lacking. Without the Emperor's light to guide you, the ruinous powers will devour you from within. Courage is not enough. Honor is not enough. Only faith can protect you from what is coming. Con Ward moved to stand beside Marissa, his presence a wordless statement of solidarity. Sister Superior, we respect your faith. But the inner sphere has survived 1,000 years without your Emperor. We've fought wars that devastated entire star systems. We've maintained our humanity through conflicts that would have broken lesser civilizations. If faith in your Emperor is what keeps you fighting, that's your strength. Ours is different, but no less valid. Inquisitor Valin's augmetic eye fixed on Khan Ward with laser intensity. Your different strength is precisely what concerns me, Khan. You speak of surviving without the Emperor, as if that's something to be proud of rather than a damning indictment. In this galaxy, there are 4 powers who offer false strength. Khorne offers martial prowess, Tzeentch offers knowledge, Nurgle offers endurance, and Slaanesh offers perfection. Tell me, Khan, which of the dark gods have you unknowingly served? The temperature in the command center dropped 10 degrees. Every Imperial present tensed, hands moving toward weapons. The inner sphere officers reacted instinctively. Elementals in the corridor outside raised their weapons. Davion infantry took defensive positions. For 5 heartbeats, the fire base teetered on the edge of friendly fire incident that would end in mutual slaughter. Then Lord Colonel Kestis's voice cut through the tension like a chainsaw. Inquisitor, with respect, save the theological debates for after we've killed the actual heretics. The Death Guard fleet will achieve weapons range in 6 hours. We have battle mechs to deploy, firing solutions to calculate, and Emperor knows how many other preparations before they're on top of us. Question the inner sphere's souls later. Right now, I need to know if they can fight. Vaylin held Khan Ward's gaze for another moment, then nodded curtly. Very well, Lord Colonel. But know this, inner sphere. I will be watching. Every decision, every action, every moment of combat. And if I see one sign, that you have been touched by chaos, I will execute you myself and damn the consequences. Understood, Khan Ward replied, his voice level despite the fury burning in his chest. And understand this, Inquisitor. Clan Wolf does not serve false gods. We serve honor, courage, and the bonds of brotherhood forged in combat. You may not respect that, but you will witness it firsthand when we hold that valley against your Death Guard. Then we can discuss whether faith in invisible gods matters as much as faith in the warriors beside you. Before Vaylin could respond, the command center's Vox system crackled to life with a burst of static and corrupted cant. Lord Colonel Kestis's face went pale as he recognized the signature. They're hailing us. Emperor's teeth. The Death Guard are hailing us. He gestured, and a tech priest activated the speakers. The voice that emerged was wrong. Inhuman, like meat grinding through a voxcaster corrupted by centuries of decay. But the words were clear, spoken in Gothic accented by something that might have been laughter if it wasn't so diseased. Imperial dogs, we smell you. Fresh meat, uncorrupted steel. The Plague Father is pleased. You've brought him new canvases to paint with beautiful decay. We are the putrescent host, 12th Company of the Death Guard Legion, and we bear Grandfather Nurgle's gifts. In 6 hours, we will grace your moon with his blessings. Pray to your corpse god. It won't save you. Nothing saves you from the inevitability of entropy. All things rot, all things decay, all things return to Nurgle's loving embrace. Static, then silence. Sister Superior Celestine made the sign of the Aquila across her chest, the double-headed eagle of the Imperium. The Death Guard's 12th Company. I know them. 300 plague marines, supported by demon engines and corrupted war machines. They are led by Plague Champion Festurus the Bloated, who has existed in Nurgle's service for 6,000 years. He is... She paused, searching for words. An artist of disease. He considers battlefield corruption his masterwork. Your pristine battle mechs will be a temptation he cannot resist. Colonel Devion found her voice despite the horror crawling up her spine. 300 against how many of us? 5,000 Imperial Guard, 50 Sisters of Battle from my order, 12 battle mechs from your forces, and whatever support the Forge World deems expendable. Lord Colonel Kestis pulled up the tactical display again. In conventional warfare, those numbers would be comfortable odds. Against Plague Marines, they're barely adequate. Each one is effectively immortal, can operate with organs hanging from wounds, and spreads contagion with every breath. They don't fear death, because they've already died 1,000 times and been resurrected by Nurgle's will. Then we kill them again, Star Captain Marissa said simply. Permanently this time. Kestis studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have courage, mech warrior. Let's see if it's enough. All units move to deployment positions. The Emperor protects, but having guns helps. 4 hours later, Con Ward stood in the cockpit of his Timberwolf, a 75-ton assault mech bristling with long-range missiles, pulse lasers, and autocannons. Around him, 11 other battle mechs from combined Clan Wolf and House Davion forces took up positions in the valley Lord Colonel Kestis had designated. Behind them, 3 companies of Imperial Guard Leman Russ tanks idled with engines running, their commanders coordinating firing solutions via Vox network. Con Ward checked his 360-degree display, confirming positions for Star Captain Marissa's Dire Wolf on his right flank and Colonel Davion's personal Atlas on his left. The Atlas was a 100-ton monster, the heaviest mech in the Inner Sphere arsenal, mounting an AC-20 autocannon that could core enemy mechs in a single shot. If they were going to make a stand, these were the machines to do it with. All units, communications check, he broadcast on the company frequency. 11 confirmations came back immediately. Professional, calm, ready. These were warriors who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Then the Forge World's long-range scanners detected incoming. Lord Colonel Kestis's voice crackled over the command channel. Contact. Multiple signals entering high atmosphere. Death Guard drop pods confirmed. ETA to your position, 90 seconds. The Emperor protects Inner Sphere. Make those seconds count. Con Ward opened a private channel to his command staff. Remember your training. Maintain firing discipline. Concentrate fire on individual targets until confirmed kills. These Death Guard may be hard to kill, but even they can't survive having their heads blown off. Clan Wolf has never broken. We will not start today. Selah. The ritual clan affirmation came back from every mech warrior, spoken with the absolute confidence of warriors who knew no fear. Sister Superior Celestine's voice cut into the channel, broadcast on all frequencies. Warriors of the Inner Sphere, hear the words of the Emperor's faithful. You stand now at the threshold of darkness. Beyond courage, beyond honor, beyond all mortal strength lies faith. The absolute certainty that the Emperor watches, judges, and empowers those who serve. You have rejected his light. I pray you find it before the end, for without it, your souls are forfeit. But until then, her voice hardened into steel. Fight like the humans you claim to be. Die on your feet, not on your knees. And know that if you fall, we will remember your sacrifice, even if your souls are lost. The valley ahead suddenly bloomed with impact craters, as dozens of drop pods slammed into the surface like meteors. Each pod was the size of a small building, designed to survive atmospheric entry and deliver their cargo directly into combat zones. As the Inner Sphere mech warriors watched, the pod's blast doors blew open with explosive force. And the Death Guard emerged. They were nightmares given form. Space Marine power armor, but corrupted beyond recognition. green with decay, covered in boils that pulsed with unnatural life, streaming with fluids that shouldn't exist in reality. Helmets cracked open to reveal faces rotted down to bone, but still moving, still breathing, still laughing with voices that sounded like plague swamps burping. They carried weapons scaled for beings that could shatter stone with their bare hands, bolters that fired explosive shells the size of a man's fist, plague knives that wept toxins, and some carried weapons Con Ward couldn't even identify. At their head, emerging from the largest drop pod, came a figure that dwarfed even his massive brothers. Plague champion Festurus the Bloated stood 12 feet tall, his armor so thick with decay it had become a living ecosystem. Flies swarmed around him in clouds. His power scythe, a chainsaw-edged blade mounted on a 2-meter pole, dripped with substances that corroded the ground where they fell. When he spoke, his voice boomed across the valley, somehow bypassing the Vox network and speaking directly into every warrior's mind, a violation that made even Con Ward's skin crawl. Fresh steel. Clean machines. Oh, how grandfather will delight in your transformation. Come, children of false certainty, let me show you the beautiful inevitability of decay. Then the Death Guard charged. Not slowly, not shambling like corpses. They charged with the speed of genetically enhanced super soldiers, covering the kilometer of valley floor in seconds that seemed impossible for beings that massive. All units, weapons free. Con Ward's command cut through the horror. Concentrate fire. Bring them down. The valley exploded into war. 12 battlemechs opened fire simultaneously. Long-range missiles streaked out in flights of 20, impacting among the Death Guard with explosions that would have vaporized normal soldiers. Autocannons roared, sending tungsten-depleted uranium shells downrange at hypersonic velocities. Pulse lasers carved lines of superheated air, targeting center mass with surgical precision. The firepower unleashed in that first salvo could have leveled a small city. The Death Guard barely slowed. Several went down, their armor cratered by direct hits. But even those kept crawling forward, dragging themselves through the dirt while their brothers stepped over them. The ones still standing took hits that should have been instantly fatal. Autocannon rounds punching clean through torsos, lasers burning holes through helmets, and kept coming, laughing with voices that gargled on their own blood. Target those weapons. Colonel Davion's voice carried command authority forged through decades of combat. Her Atlas's AC-20 boomed, the massive shell catching a Plague Marine center mass and blowing him backward 15 meters. He didn't get back up, but another took his place without pause. The Death Guard returned fire. Their bolters spoke with a sound like thunder distilled into hatred. Explosive rounds detonated against battlemech armor, each one designed to penetrate Space Marine power armor, and proving frighteningly effective against mech plating. Star Captain Marissa's Dire Wolf took 3 hits to the right torso, breaching the armor and exposing internal structure. Alarms screamed in her cockpit. Right torso compromised, she reported, her voice steady despite the damage. Ammunition vulnerable, compensating. Then the Lehman Russ tanks opened fire from their concealed positions. 200 battle cannons spoke as one, turning the valley into a hurricane of high explosive. The Death Guard finally took serious casualties. Plague Marines blown apart by direct hits, limbs severed by shrapnel, bodies pulverized by overlapping kill zones. But they kept coming, kept firing, kept laughing. And then the plague fog rolled in. It came from nowhere and everywhere. A sickly green mist that smelled of rot and decay and diseases that had names in languages humanity had forgotten. It touched metal, and the metal began to corrode. It touched polymer seals, and they dissolved. It touched bare ground, and weeds began growing, mutating, reaching up with thorny vines that pulsed with unnatural life. "Seal cockpits," Con Ward commanded. "Full environmental containment. Do not let that mist inside." But even as he spoke, he saw mech warrior Jacobson's Hunchback, a 50-ton fire support mech, shudder as the fog found a microfracture in the armor plating. Jacobson's screams echoed across the company frequency for 5 seconds that felt like eternity, then cut off abruptly. The Hunchback collapsed, its pilot dead from exposure to diseases that didn't exist in any medical database. "One down." Plague Champion Festorus's voice oozed through the Vox corruption like sewage through a broken pipe. 11 to go. Don't worry, children. Death is not the end. In Nurgle's garden, you will bloom eternal. The Death Guard reached melee range, and Con Ward learned that in the 42nd Millennium, warfare was more brutal than anything the Inner Sphere had ever conceived. A Plague Marine actually leaped, 15 meters straight up to land on Colonel Davion's Atlas. His chainsaw blade screamed to life, carving through the head section's armor like it was paper. Davion ejected emergency countermeasures, explosive bolts designed to throw off borders, and the Plague Marine was blown free. He landed on his feet, still laughing, and charged again. Star Captain Marissa's Dire Wolf crushed 3 Plague Marines under its massive feet, each one making a wet, squelching sound that spoke of bodies more liquid than solid. But even dying, they struck out with plague knives, carving gashes in the mech's leg actuators. Acid-laden fluids from their weapons began eating through the ferro-fibrous armor. Con Ward's Timberwolf poured fire into the advancing horde, its dual extended-range large lasers carving through 3 Plague Marines in as many seconds. But for every one that fell, 2 more advanced. The mathematics of attrition were brutally simple. The Death Guard could afford to trade casualties because every one of them was worth 10 guardsmen. The Inner Sphere couldn't. Every mech lost was irreplaceable. "Lord Colonel," Con Ward broadcast on the command frequency. "Execute your pincer now. We can't hold this position much longer." "Negative." Kestis's voice came back strained. "Demon engine just emerged from a warp portal on our left flank. We're engaged. You hold that valley for 10 more minutes or we're all dead." 10 minutes. An eternity in combat. An impossibility against enemies that couldn't be killed. But Con Ward was Clan Wolf, and Clan Wolf did not break. "All units. Fighting withdrawal to position echo. Maintain fire discipline. We will hold." The 12 battle mechs, minus Jacobson's fallen Hunchback, began backing up slowly, step by grinding step, maintaining a devastating curtain of fire. Imperial Guard artillery rained down behind the Death Guard, trying to cut off reinforcements. Sister Superior Celestine's voice rose above the carnage, broadcasting prayers that somehow bolstered morale despite meaning nothing to the Inner Sphere warriors. And in that valley, on a barren moon orbiting a forge world in the 42nd Millennium, warriors from 2 different humanities, one that had evolved in the grim darkness, one that remembered the light, made their stand against the inevitable entropy of chaos. The Death Guard charged into a wall of fire and steel, their laughter mixing with the thunder of autocannons and the screaming of dying machines. Plague Champion. Festorus raised his power scythe to the diseased sky and bellowed words in a language that made reality itself wince. "For the Plague Father, for Grandfather Nurgle, let them all rot in his blessed garden." And the Inner Sphere learned that in Warhammer 40K, there was no such thing as clean warfare. There was only survival, corruption, or death. Usually all 3. The battle for the valley had raged for 18 minutes when the Lehman-Russ pincer movement finally executed. 200 Imperial Guard battle tanks swept in from concealed positions on both flanks, their battle cannons roaring in synchronized fury. The Death Guard found themselves caught in a crossfire that would have annihilated any conventional force. High explosive shells detonating among their ranks, plasma weapons reducing Plague Marines to superheated vapor, lascannons punching clean through corrupted power armor. But the Death Guard were anything but conventional. Even as dozens fell to the Imperial counterattack, Plague Champion Festurus raised his power scythe and spoke words that made the air itself curdle with corruption. A warp portal tore open behind the Imperial lines, a wound in reality through which demon engines emerged, screaming with voices that had never been human. The machines were nightmares of twisted metal and demonic flesh. Bloated plague drones mounted with rotary cannons that fired diseased rounds, and something that Khan Ward's tactical computer refused to classify because it violated every law of physics. The Imperial Guard left flank collapsed in minutes. Guardsmen died screaming as plague rounds liquefied their organs. Lehman Russ tanks corroded from within as demonic infection spread through their crews. Lord Colonel Kestis's command Chimera transport took a direct hit from a plague drone's weapon, the entire vehicle dissolving into rust and screaming metal in seconds. All Imperial forces, fall back to secondary positions. The order came from Kestis himself, his voice strained with pain. Inner Sphere, maintain your position. We need 5 more minutes to regroup. Khan Ward's Timberwolf had taken catastrophic damage. His right arm actuator was destroyed, his center torso armor was at 30%, and his heat sinks were running in the red from sustained fire. Around him, the remaining battle mechs were in similar condition. They'd killed over 50 Plague Marines, an achievement that would have been celebrated in any Inner Sphere engagement. But 250 still advanced, and the demon engines were turning the battle into a nightmare. Khan Ward. Star Captain Marissa's voice cut through the chaos. Her dire wolf had lost its entire right side to a Plague Marine's melt-a-bomb, the fusion reactor barely contained by emergency shielding. We can't hold. We need to retreat now or we'll be overrun. Every tactical instinct Khan Ward possessed screamed that she was right. This was a losing battle. The enemy had superior numbers, demonic support, and weaponry that corrupted as it killed. Continuing to fight was suicide. But retreat would mean abandoning the Imperial Guard to be slaughtered. It would mean breaking faith with warriors who, despite their fanaticism and brutality, had fought beside them. And more pragmatically, it would mean confirming Inquisitor Valen's suspicions that the Inner Sphere couldn't be trusted in true combat. Khan Ward made his decision in the heartbeat between one breath and the next. Negative, Star Captain. Clan Wolf does not abandon allies on the field of battle. We hold. Selah, came the response, spoken with the grim acceptance of a warrior who knew she was about to die, but would do so with honor. Then a new voice cut across every channel. Mechanical, divine, absolute. Forces of the Inner Sphere. This is Fabricator General Xylanus. Your performance has been adequate. The Omnissiah recognizes martial capability when data is provided. You have proven you can bleed for the Imperium. Now let us demonstrate what the Mechanicus does for those who earn our attention. The ground shook, not from artillery or orbital strikes, but from footfalls that registered on seismic sensors. Khan Ward's external cameras swiveled toward the ridgeline and caught sight of something that made his breath stop. A Titan was walking toward the battlefield, not a battle mech, not even a close approximation. A true god machine of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a Reaver-class battle Titan, 40 meters tall, weighing thousands of tons, bristling with weapons that could level cities. Its armor was cathedral-thick plates inscribed with high Gothic prayers. Its void shields shimmered with protective energy that could withstand orbital bombardment. And mounted on its carapace was a weapon Khan Ward's tactical computer identified with rising horror. An Apocalypse missile launcher, capable of firing warheads with kiloton-yield explosives. The Titan's war horn sounded, a blast that shook the valley and made the Plague Marines actually pause in their advance. When the Princeps spoke through the Titan's voxcasters, his voice carried the mechanical divinity of the Omnissiah made manifest. I am Princeps Thalios of the Legio Metallica, master of the Reaver-class Titan, Ferris Will. By order of the Fabricator General, this battlefield is now under Titan operational control. All Imperial forces withdraw to minimum safe distance. The heretics will be purged. The Reaver raised its arm, a limb the size of a drop ship mounting a Gatling blaster capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. The weapon spun up with a sound like reality tearing and then opened fire. The Death Guard lines simply ceased to exist. The Gatling blaster chewed through Plague Marines like a harvester through wheat, each round designed to penetrate Space Marine armor at ranges measured in kilometers. Festorus's Plague Warriors tried to return fire, their bolters and plague weapons hammering against the Titan's void shields. The shields held without even flickering. Turbo Laser Destructor. Fire. The Titan's secondary weapon, a laser cannon that drew enough power to run a small city, discharged. The beam carved through 3 demon engines in a single sweep, superheating their corrupted metal until they exploded from internal pressure. The backwash of energy sent shockwaves across the battlefield that knocked smaller Plague Marines off their feet. Plague Champion Festorus bellowed in rage and charged the Titan directly. His power scythe flared with warp energy as he closed the distance with superhuman speed. He actually managed to reach the Titan's foot, an achievement that spoke to his millennia of combat experience, and brought his weapon down in a blow that would have severed a battlemech's leg. The power scythe connected with the Titan's void shield and stopped. Energy discharge from the impact vaporized the ground around Festorus. The Plague Champion staggered, his corrupted armor smoking. The Titan didn't even acknowledge him. It simply shifted its weight and stepped forward. Festorus tried to dodge. He was too slow. Thousands of tons of blessed adamantium came down on top of him with the inevitability of continental drift. When the Titan lifted its foot, nothing remained of Plague Champion Festorus the Bloated, except a smear of diseased ichor and the broken remains of his power scythe. The Death Guard broke. Not from fear, they were incapable of that, but from tactical assessment. Without their champion and facing a Titan supported by regrouping Imperial forces, continued assault was futile. They retreated in good order, their bolters still firing, their plague weapons still seeking targets. But they retreated. The Reaver Titan didn't pursue. It simply stood sentinel over the valley, its weapons tracking the retreating heretics, while Princeps Thalios' voice boomed across all channels. The Omnissiah's wrath is absolute. The machine god's servants are eternal. Let the heretics remember this day when they crawl back to their plague ships and report their failure to the dark gods. In the aftermath, Khan Ward stood in the shadow of the Reaver Titan and tried to comprehend the scale of what he'd just witnessed. His Timberwolf sensors reported the god machine was operating at 43% power, meaning it had defeated the Death Guard assault while barely exerting itself. The weapons it carried could destroy his entire company in seconds. The void shields made battlemech armor look like tissue paper. This was the true power of the Imperium. Not the Imperial Guard with their conventional weapons, not even the Plague Marines with their corrupted might. But war machines so powerful they redefined the concept of warfare itself. Colonel Davion limped her damaged Atlas over to stand beside the Timberwolf. Her voice over the private channel carried exhaustion and something approaching despair. "Con Ward, we need to talk, privately." They met in person 30 minutes later in a hastily erected command tent, along with Commandant Steiner and the surviving mech warriors. Star Captain Marissa was there, her face still pale from combat stimulants wearing off. They'd lost 3 battle mechs: Jacobson's hunchback to plague exposure, a Davion enforcer that had been swarmed by plague marines and torn apart, and a Clan Wolf Stormcrow whose reactor had gone critical after taking sustained fire. 18 mech warriors had gone into battle. 15 had come out. By Inner Sphere standards, those were acceptable casualties. By the standards of facing chaos, they'd gotten off lightly. "We can't win here," Colonel Davion said without preamble. "That Titan just demonstrated that we're hopelessly outmatched. One Reaver destroyed what 300 Plague Marines and Demon engines couldn't. And the Imperials have hundreds of those things, maybe thousands across their territory. We knew we were technologically inferior," Commandant Steiner replied, but his voice lacked conviction. That was always the assessment. "No, Eric, you're not understanding." Davion pulled up tactical footage from the battle on a data slate. "Look at this. The Titan's void shields absorbed more firepower than our entire company could generate in an hour. Its armor is literally impervious to our weapons. I put 3 AC-20 rounds into its foot and it didn't even register damage. We're not just outgunned. We're operating on a completely different scale of warfare." Con Ward had been silent, processing the same conclusions. Now he spoke with the cold pragmatism that defined clan military doctrine. "Then we adapt. The Imperials have Titans, but they also need infantry, armor support, and mobile units. That's where battlemechs fit into their doctrine. We're not meant to fight Titans. We're meant to support them. To provide mobile firepower against targets too small for god machines, but too dangerous for conventional forces. You want us to become Imperial auxiliaries." Star Captain Marissa's voice carried barely suppressed rage. "To serve these machine-worshipping fanatics who execute their own soldiers for questioning orders. I want us to survive long enough to find a way home." Con Ward snapped back. "We're stranded in a hostile galaxy, Marissa. We have no supply lines, no industrial base, no way to replace losses. Every mech destroyed is gone forever. Every mech warrior killed is irreplaceable. If we try to fight the Imperium, we die. If we try to flee into unknown space, we probably die. But if we prove our worth as allies..." He let the implication hang. The tent fell silent. Finally, Commandant Steiner spoke what they were all thinking. "The Fabricator General sent that Titan to save us. That wasn't coincidence. He was sending a message. You fought well, but remember who holds real power. Now he'll expect payment for that rescue." As if summoned by speaking his name, the tent's entrance parted and Fabricator General Xylanus entered, his mechanical form somehow more imposing in the confined space. Behind him came Inquisitor Valen, and surprisingly, Princeps Thalios, a man whose body was so integrated with his Titan systems that he walked with a mechanical gait and his eyes glowed with the same light as the god machine sensors. Inner Sphere Delegation. Xylanus began without preamble, his 7 red eyes sweeping across them. "You have passed the first test. You fought with honor. You held position under impossible circumstances. You did not break or flee. The Omnissiah recognizes competence when properly demonstrated. The Ordo Xenos concurs, Inquisitor Valen added, though his tone suggested he was agreeing reluctantly. You showed no signs of chaos corruption or Xenos influence during combat. Your weapons functioned as expected. Your tactics were sound if primitive. You are, apparently, exactly what you claim to be. Lost humans who retain technological knowledge the Imperium forgot. Princeps Thalios stepped forward, his augmetic voice carrying harmonics that suggested he spent more time connected to his Titan than his biological body. I reviewed your combat performance through the Ferris Wheel's sensor arrays. Your battle mechs demonstrated capabilities that fill an interesting niche. Too small to threaten true Titans, too powerful to be conventional armor. Mobile enough to pursue infantry-scale threats, durable enough to engage heretic Astartes in extended firefights. The Legio Metallica could use such assets as screening forces for Titan deployments. Which brings us to our proposal, Fabricator General Xylanus continued. You wish to return home. We wish to acquire your technology. These desires can be aligned. Forge World Metallica will dedicate resources to calculating a warp translation vector to your point of origin. This will require months of study, possibly years. During that time, you will serve as auxiliary forces attached to the Legio Metallica. You will fight where we direct. You will share technical specifications for battle mech construction. And in exchange, his 7 eyes pulsed. You will receive resources, repairs, and the full protection of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Refuse, and you are on your own in a galaxy that devours the weak. Khan Ward met the Fabricator General's inhuman gaze without flinching. What you're proposing is essentially indentured servitude. We fight your wars while you study our technology, with the promise that maybe, someday, you'll help us get home. No, Silanus corrected. What I'm proposing is symbiotic relationship grounded in mutual benefit and data exchange. You need our resources. We need your knowledge. The alternative is that the Inquisition declares you dangerous anomalies and has you purged from orbit. Choose pragmatically, Khan Ward. Choose survival. Colonel Davion exchanged glances with Khan Ward and Commandant Steiner. They discussed this possibility during the battle, the likelihood that the Imperials would leverage their desperation. Now the moment had arrived. We need to discuss this among ourselves, Davion said carefully. This is not a decision one commander can make unilaterally. It affects 3 separate military forces and hundreds of personnel. You have 1 hour, Inquisitor Valen stated flatly. After that, I will require your answer. Accept the Fabricator General's offer, or I will recommend to the Ordo Xenos that you be classified as potential Xenos infiltrators and dealt with accordingly. The Imperium does not permit uncertain variables to exist within its borders. You will be categorized, ally or enemy. Choose which. The 3 Imperials departed, leaving the Inner Sphere delegation alone with their impossible decision. Star Captain Marissa was the first to speak, her voice tight with fury. This is blackmail, pure and simple. They're holding our survival hostage to extract our technology. Of course they are, Commandant Steiner replied wearily. This is what empires do, Marissa. The Inner Sphere would do the same if the situation were reversed. Hell, House Steiner has done the same to smaller states dozens of times. We're just on the receiving end this time. There's another consideration, Colonel Davion said quietly. That Inquisitor wasn't bluffing. I've read people for 30 years, and Valen will absolutely have us killed if we refuse. He views us as a threat to his precious Imperium's theological foundations. The only reason we're still alive is that the Fabricator General wants our technology badly enough to override inquisitorial concerns. Con Ward paced the tent, his mind racing through scenarios. Clan Wolf doctrine emphasized honor above all. Accepting this deal would mean serving people who represented everything the clans opposed: authoritarianism, religious fanaticism, technological stagnation. But refusing meant death for everyone under his command. "We accept," he said finally. "But we negotiate better terms. We're not giving them free access to all our technology. We provide specifications for selected systems only, with incremental releases tied to measurable progress on getting us home. We maintain autonomous command over our forces. We don't take orders directly from Imperial Guard commanders, only from this Princeps Thalios, who seems to actually respect combat capability. And we establish a timeline. If they haven't found a way to send us home within 2 standard years, they release us to find our own solution. We're not going to be trapped here forever while they milk us for every technical secret. The Imperials won't agree to that. Star Captain Marissa protested. They want total control. Then we make them understand that we're more valuable as willing allies than as resentful prisoners. Con Ward's expression hardened into pure clan determination. We just held a valley against 300 Chaos Space Marines and survived. We earned respect out there. Now we leverage it. The Imperium respects strength, so we show them that Inner Sphere warriors don't kneel, even when pragmatism requires cooperation. When the hour expired and the delegation reconvened, Con Ward laid out their counterproposal to Fabricator General Xylanus with the confidence of a warrior who knew he held more leverage than the Mechanicus wanted to admit. Xylanus listened without interruption, his 7 eyes processing every word. When Con Ward finished, the Fabricator General was silent for a full minute, an eternity in tense negotiation. Then he spoke, and his mechanical voice carried something that might have been respect. "Acceptable, with modifications. You will provide technical specifications for fusion reactor technology, targeting computer architecture and armor metallurgy, systems that interest the Mechanicus most. You will maintain tactical autonomy, but operate under strategic direction from Princeps Thalios and the Legio Metallica command structure. And you will have 3 standard years, not 2. The warp is unpredictable. Rushing calculations will result in your obliteration, not your salvation." "Agreed," Con Ward replied. "With one additional condition. Any Inner Sphere personnel killed in Imperial service will be honored according to our traditions, not turned into servitors or recycled for industrial materials. Our dead belong to us." A pause, then, "Agreed. The Omnissiah recognizes the value of honoring the fallen. Your dead will be treated with respect." "Then we have a deal, Fabricator General. The Inner Sphere will serve the Legio Metallica as auxiliary forces. In exchange, you will work to return us home. May both sides honor this agreement." Xylanus extended a mechadendrite, the tech priest equivalent of offering a handshake. Con Ward took it in his biological hand, and they sealed the bargain that would bind the Inner Sphere to the Imperium's eternal war. Inquisitor Valen watched with cold eyes that promised future scrutiny. Princeps Thalios nodded with what might have been approval. And outside, the Reaver Titan Ferris Will stood sentinel over the scarred battlefield, a reminder of the true power the Inner Sphere had just agreed to serve alongside. "Welcome to the Imperium of Man," Fabricator General Xylanus said as the handshake ended. "May you prove worthy of the Omnissiah's attention. Your first deployment will be within the week. A Chaos warband has been detected in the neighboring system, and the Legio Metallica has been ordered to purge them. You will screen for our Titan maniple. Consider it orientation to how we prosecute war in the 42nd Millennium. As the delegation departed to inform their forces of the decision, Colonel Davion leaned close to Con Ward and whispered, "We just sold our souls to devils wearing the skin of humanity. I hope you know what you're doing." Con Ward watched the Reaver Titan through the tent's opening, its weapons still warm from killing plague Marines, and replied with grim certainty, "I know exactly what I'm doing, Colonel. I'm keeping us alive long enough to go home. Everything else is secondary, even honor." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. But in the grim darkness of the far future, sometimes survival required swallowing your pride and accepting that there were no clean choices, only necessary ones. The Inner Sphere had just learned its second lesson about Warhammer 40K. In this galaxy, everyone served something larger than themselves. The only question was whether you'd serve by choice or by force. They'd chosen choice. Time would tell if that made any difference. The enemy came as they always did in the 42nd Millennium, without warning, without mercy, and with the absolute certainty that suffering was holy. System designation, Val's Crown. A minor Forge World 3 weeks, warp travel from Metallica, specializing in manufacturing power cells for Imperial Guard lace gun production. Population, 9 billion souls, 86% of whom were bonded to the Mechanicus in perpetual servitude. Strategic value, moderate. Likelihood of successful defense against a major chaos incursion, minimal. The Inner Sphere force deployed alongside the Legio Metallica maniple consisted of Con Ward's full company, now reinforced to 18 battle mechs after emergency repairs and the deployment of reserve units from the dropships. They arrived via Imperial transport, their machines secured in massive cargo bays, while tech priests performed last-minute maintenance rituals that the mech warriors had grudgingly learned to tolerate. Princeps Thalios had been direct in his briefing. "This is a chaos warband of the Black Legion, Abaddon the Despoiler's personal forces. They raid for slaves, gene seed, and the simple pleasure of making the Imperium bleed. Our objective is elimination. No prisoners, no quarter. Chaos cannot be negotiated with. It can only be destroyed." Now, standing in the shattered remains of Hive Primus's industrial district, Con Ward was learning exactly what chaos warfare looked like at scale. The Death Guard had been horrifying. The Black Legion was worse, not because they were more physically dangerous, but because they were organized, professional. The Death Guard fought like plague-ridden berserkers sustained by Nurgle's rot. The Black Legion fought like soldiers who had 10,000 years of experience corrupting, conquering, and destroying. Their drop had been textbook perfect. Multiple strike forces hitting critical infrastructure simultaneously, demon engines providing heavy support, and cultist insurgents activating from within the Hive City itself. By the time the Imperial Response Force arrived, 3 major manufactorums had been seized. The planetary defense grid was compromised, and approximately 2 million civilians were either dead or had disappeared into chaos transport ships for purposes that didn't bear thinking about. The Legio Metallica had deployed 3 Titans, the Reaver Ferris Will under Princeps Thalios, and 2 Warhound-class Scout Titans, smaller, faster god machines mounting turbo lasers and Vulcan megabolters. The Inner Sphere battle mechs formed a screen ahead of the Titans, their role to engage targets too small for god machine weapons and to draw enemy fire away from the truly valuable assets. It was, Con Ward reflected bitterly, exactly the role the Fabricator General had described. They were expendable screening units, valuable enough to repair, not valuable enough to mourn if destroyed. "Contact, bearing 035, range 2 kilometers. Star Captain Marissa's voice came through with professional calm despite the circumstances. Her dire wolf sensors had detected movement in the ruined hab blocks ahead. Multiple signatures. IFF reading, negative. Not Imperial. All units, combat spread formation. Con Ward deployed his company with practiced efficiency. Maintain visual range with supporting elements. Rules of engagement. Anything that moves and isn't broadcasting Imperial codes is hostile. Fire at will. The Black Legion emerged from the ruins like shadows given form. Unlike the Plague Marines with their shambling decay, these Chaos Space Marines moved with predatory grace. Their power armor was midnight black, trimmed with brass and gold, marked with the 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided. They carried weapons that radiated malevolence even at distance. Demon weapons, bound with entities from the warp that hungered for souls. Their leader stood at the head of the formation, easily identified by the sheer presence he radiated. Where Plague Champion Festurus had been diseased corpulence, this champion was dark magnificence. His armor pristine despite 10,000 years of warfare. His power sword crackling with warp lightning, his helmet adorned with horns that curved like those of some ancient predator. When he spoke, his voice bypassed the Vox entirely, speaking directly into every warrior's mind with the authority of one who had bargained with gods and survived. Ah, fresh meat. I am Malphael the Breaker, champion of the Black Legion's 7th Company, chosen of the Dark Gods. I have walked the long war for 8,000 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. And you? The contempt in his voice was palpable. You are children playing with toys you don't understand, serving a corpse god who never cared for you. Surrender your war machines. Join Chaos willingly. The Dark Gods reward competence, and you have demonstrated adequate martial capability. Colonel Davion's response was to fire her Atlas's AC-20 directly at Malphael's center mass. The massive shell crossed 2 kilometers in seconds and impacted with enough force to crater a building. Malphael didn't dodge. He simply raised one hand and the shell stopped in midair, held by warp energy, then exploded harmlessly against a barrier of psychic force. So be it. Your deaths will be instructive. The Black Legion charged, and Con Ward discovered that professional Chaos Space Marines were infinitely more dangerous than diseased ones. They moved in coordinated fire teams, using cover with tactical precision that would have impressed any Inner Sphere officer. Their bolters fired in controlled bursts rather than wild sprays, targeting joints, sensors, and vulnerable points with the experience of warriors who had been killing since before the Inner Sphere existed. And they brought heavy weapons, lascannons that carved through battlemech armor like tissue, melta-guns that turned hardened steel molten, and autocannons that fired demon-corrupted rounds screaming with the voices of tortured souls. A Davion enforcer took 3 lascannon hits in rapid succession and went down, its gyro destroyed and its pilot ejecting just before the fusion reactor went critical. A Clan Wolf summoner engaged a Black Legion Havoc squad in a firefight and lost, their coordinated fire overwhelming its armor in seconds. Star Captain Marissa's dire wolf dueled with a Chaos dreadnought. A walker not unlike a battle mech, but piloted by a dying space marine entombed within its armored shell, and barely survived when her extended-range particle projection cannons finally punched through its frontal armor. We're getting massacred. Commandant Steiner's voice carried strain over the command channel. His Zeus had lost both arms and was retreating behind the Titan line. These aren't like the Death Guard. They're adapting to our tactics in real time. He was right. Con Ward watched the Black Legion respond to their fire patterns by shifting formations, using demon engines as mobile cover, and targeting damaged mechs preferentially to maximize kill ratios. This was warfare as art form, prosecuted by beings who had been perfecting their craft for millennia. Then Princeps Thalios' voice boomed across all channels with divine authority. Inner sphere forces, disengage and fall back to grid reference Theta 7. The Legio Metallica is assuming direct fire control. Con Ward didn't need to be told twice. All units, fighting withdrawal. Fall back to designated coordinates. Move. The battle mechs retreated in good order, maintaining suppressing fire. The Black Legion pursued, exactly as Princeps Thalios had predicted. They poured into the open plaza area the inner sphere had just vacated, their champion Malphael at their head, sensing victory. The Reaver Titan Ferris Will stepped into line of sight and opened fire with every weapon simultaneously. The Apocalypse missile launcher discharged first, filling the air with warheads that detonated in overlapping fireballs across the plaza. Black Legion Space Marines were blown apart by shockwaves that exceeded any conventional explosive. The Gatling blaster followed, its thousands of rounds per minute chewing through corrupted power armor and demon engine armor, plating alike. The turbo laser destructor carved a line of superheated death through the center of the formation. In 5 seconds, the Reaver killed more Black Legion than the entire Inner Sphere Company had managed in 20 minutes of sustained combat. But Malphael survived. His warp powers protected him, and he responded with the full fury of a Chaos champion who had made pacts with entities beyond mortal comprehension. He raised his power sword to the sky and screamed words in the dark tongue, the language of chaos itself, and reality responded. A warp rift tore open above the plaza. Through it stepped something that made Con Ward's tactical computer crash from trying to process impossible geometry. A demon prince, a being that had once been mortal, but had been elevated by the dark gods into something beyond flesh, beyond sanity, beyond reality's laws. It stood 50 meters tall, its form shifting between dimensions, its wings casting shadows that moved independently of light sources, its voice speaking in frequencies that caused structural damage to nearby buildings. The Warhound Titans engaged immediately, their turbo lasers carving into the demon's form. The beams passed through it, the entity existing partially outside real space, making conventional weapons less effective. The demon prince laughed, and the laugh was a physical force that shattered windows across 3 city blocks. Then Sister Superior Celestine's voice cut through the horror, broadcast from somewhere in the ruins. Faith is my shield. The Emperor protects. A lance of pure golden light descended from orbit. Not a weapon, but faith made manifest through the will of the God Emperor, channeled through his most devoted warriors. The demon prince screamed as the light struck it, burning away portions of its corrupted form. It was wounded, not destroyed, but hurt in ways that mere physical weapons could never achieve. Princeps Thalios seized the opening. All Titans, concentrated fire on the demon. Burn it from reality. 3 god machines opened fire simultaneously. The combined firepower of weapons designed to destroy cities hammered into the demon prince while it was vulnerable, each hit punching through its weakened defenses. The entity thrashed, howled, and began to dissolve, its anchor to reality severed by the combination of faith and firepower. With a final scream that caused every window in a 5-kilometer radius to explode, the demon prince was banished back to the warp. Malphael the Breaker stared at where his summoned ally had been, then looked at the arrayed titans and surviving inner sphere battle mechs, and made the calculation that had kept him alive for 8,000 years. He raised his power sword in salute, a gesture that carried grudging respect. and spoke one last time into every warrior's mind. You fight well, corpse worshippers, and you, inner sphere. You serve monsters who would bind you in chains of dogma, but you serve them competently. We shall meet again, and perhaps next time, you will understand that chaos offers true freedom. Then he and the surviving Black Legion disappeared into the ruins, fading away with the supernatural efficiency of beings who had been conducting strategic withdrawals for 10 millennia. Princeps Thalios didn't pursue. Instead, his voice carried across the command channel with cold pragmatism. Let them go. We achieved the objective. Hive Primus is secured. Chasing fleeing chaos forces into prepared positions is how Imperial commanders die gloriously and stupidly. We've won. Accept victory and consolidate. The after-action briefing took place in the reclaimed Administratum building 3 hours later. The Inner Sphere delegation sat across from Princeps Thalios, Fabricator General Xylanus, attending via hololith from Metallica, and Inquisitor Valen. The atmosphere was tense. Casualties? Xylanus's mechanical voice carried no emotion, but the question itself revealed his priorities. Con Ward delivered the report with military precision. 3 battle mechs destroyed, 5 damaged beyond field repair. 4 mech warriors killed in action, 7 wounded. We inflicted approximately 30 confirmed kills on Black Legion forces, plus supporting cultists and demon engines. Acceptable. Fabricator General Xylanus's 7 eyes pulsed. 30 heretic Astartes killed is a favorable exchange for 4 mech warriors. The Omnissiah is pleased with this data. Colonel Davion's knuckles went white on the table edge. Acceptable. 4 of my soldiers died today, Fabricator General. They're not data points. They're people who trusted me to bring them home alive. And they died serving the Imperium against chaos. Inquisitor Valen interjected coldly. Their sacrifice is noted in the records. Their souls belong to the Emperor now. That is the only immortality that matters in this galaxy. Their souls belong to themselves. Star Captain Marissa snapped, her clan restraint finally breaking. You don't own them just because they fought in your war. Every human soul belongs to the Emperor. Sister Superior Celestine spoke from her position by the door, her voice carrying absolute certainty. To believe otherwise is the first step toward damnation. Your friends died well. They died in service to humanity's survival. That is the greatest honor any mortal can achieve. The philosophical divide was absolute. The Imperials saw death in service as sacred duty. The Inner Sphere saw it as tragic necessity. Neither side could comprehend the other's perspective. Princeps Thalios raised a hand, his augmetic fingers whirring. This debate is irrelevant to tactical assessment. Inner Sphere forces performed adequately in screening role. They drew enemy fire, identified priority targets, and survived contact long enough for Titan weapons to achieve firing solutions. This validates the Fabricator General's theory that battle mechs fill a useful niche in combined arms operations. But, Con Ward heard the unspoken criticism. But you hesitated when the Demon Prince manifested. Your tactical computers crashed, attempting to process impossible data. Your weapons fire was ineffective because you have no experience fighting entities that exist partially outside reality. Thalios Lean continues Zubr Zuradpod 10 forward, his glowing eyes fixing on Con Ward. In the Inner Sphere, warfare is physical, mechanical, predictable. In this galaxy, warfare includes demons, psychers, xenos, whose biology violates physics, and entities that can corrupt your mind just by being perceived. You must adapt to this, or your next encounter with such forces will result in total annihilation. How? Commandant Steiner asked quietly. How do you fight something that exists outside the laws of physics? Our entire military doctrine is built on those laws. You fight with faith, Sister Superior Celestine said simply. The Emperor's light burns away demonic corruption. Faith is armor against the warp. Doubt is death. We don't have faith in your Emperor, Khan Ward replied flatly, and we're not going to pretend we do just because it's convenient. The temperature in the room dropped. Inquisitor Valen's hand moved toward his bolt pistol. Sister Superior Celestine's grip tightened on her bolter. For 5 heartbeats, violence hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. Then Fabricator General Zelanis spoke, his mechanical voice cutting through the tension. Faith in the Emperor is irrelevant if competence can be demonstrated through other means. The inner sphere survived demonic presence through discipline and tactical withdrawal, acceptable if suboptimal. However, this does reveal a critical weakness. You cannot operate independently against chaos forces. You require Imperial support for any engagement where warp entities are present. It was, Khan Ward realized, exactly what the Fabricator General wanted. Another chain binding the inner sphere to the Imperium's service. Another reason they couldn't simply take their ships and leave once they'd learned enough about this galaxy. They were becoming dependent, and the Mechanicus knew it. We're learning, Khan Ward said carefully. Every engagement teaches us more about this galaxy's threats. Give us time, and we'll adapt. We always do. Time is a resource the Imperium rarely possesses in abundance, Princeps Thalios replied. But you've earned the opportunity to prove yourself further. The Legio Metallica has received deployment orders to the Gallian sector. An orc, Wei, has been detected massing for assault on Imperial worlds. You will accompany us. Consider it your education in fighting Xenos rather than chaos. Orcs? Colonel Davion asked. Green-skinned fungal warriors who exist only to fight and reproduce through spores. Inquisitor Valen provided the explanation with barely concealed disgust. They're barely sentient, but incredibly dangerous in large numbers. Their technology works through collective belief. If enough orcs think a weapon will fire, it does, regardless of whether it should function by any sane engineering standard. They represent a different kind of threat than chaos. Less corrupting, more overwhelming. At least they can be killed by conventional weapons, Commandant Steiner said with dark humor. Everything can be killed by conventional weapons if you apply enough firepower, Princeps Thalios agreed. The question is always whether you have enough ammunition to do so before they kill you. The orcs will test that question thoroughly. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, deployment schedules, and the grim calculus of acceptable losses. Through it all, Khan Ward felt the weight of command pressing down like a physical force. He'd gotten 15 mech warriors home from that battle. 4 families would never see their loved ones again. And for what? To prove they could fight in a galaxy that cared nothing for honor, nothing for individual lives, nothing for anything except survival at any cost. But they were surviving. And every day they survived was another day closer to finding a way home. As the delegation departed, Sister Superior Celestine caught Khan Ward's arm. Her grip was gentle but unyielding. Khan Ward. A word. They stepped aside while the others continued toward the transport. Celestine studied him with eyes that had seen more combat than his entire military career. When she spoke, her voice carried an unexpected note of pity. You lead well. Your warriors trust you. You make hard decisions without hesitation. In another galaxy, in another time, you would have been called a hero. She paused. But in this galaxy, heroes die young and screaming. I've watched you in combat. You still fight like warfare is a game with rules, like honor matters, like the enemy will respect your courage. Honor always matters, Con Ward replied reflexively. No, survival matters. Victory matters. Faith matters. Honor is a luxury for civilizations that aren't teetering on the brink of extinction. Her expression softened slightly. You'll learn. Or you'll die. I pray you learn. The Imperium needs competent commanders who haven't had their souls ground into dust by 10,000 years of warfare. But don't mistake my prayers for comfort. The galaxy doesn't care about your honor. It doesn't care about your courage. It only cares about whether you're strong enough to survive until tomorrow. She released his arm and walked away, leaving Con Ward standing in the ruins of a hive city where 9 billion people had once lived, fought, loved, and died in service to an empire that viewed them as nothing more than data points in an endless calculation. In the grim darkness of the far future, the inner sphere had survived another battle. The cost was 4 dead warriors and a piece of their collective soul. The galaxy would demand more. It always did. The order came 3 weeks later, delivered via Mechanicus astropathic relay, with the cold efficiency of a civilization that measured lives in billions and victories in centuries. Legio Metallica Maniple Theta 77, including attached auxiliary forces, is hereby ordered to deploy to the Gallian sector for Xeno suppression operations. Orc Way. Designation: Gut Mangla, estimated at 12 million combatants and growing. Imperial Guard forces insufficient. Titan support required. Deploy within 48 hours. The Emperor protects. Con Ward read the orders in his makeshift office aboard the Pride of the Pack and tried to process the numbers. 12 million orcs. Not soldiers, combatants. Each one a threat that would require multiple guardsmen to kill. And the inner sphere was expected to deploy 18 battle mechs into that meat grinder as screening forces. Colonel Davion entered without knocking, her expression grim. You've seen the deployment orders? 12 million orcs, Sarah. 12 million. Con Ward couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. In the inner sphere, wars involving 12 million combatants span decades and devastate entire regions. The Imperials are treating this like a routine extermination operation. Because to them, it is. Davion dropped into the chair across from him, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I've been studying the Imperial battle reports. The Gallian sector faces orc incursions every 15 to 20 years. This is the third wave in the last century. They've refined their response doctrine to an industrial process. Deploy Titans to break enemy formations, Imperial Guard to hold ground, and, well, us now. Screening forces to handle targets too mobile for Titans to track. We're going to lose people, Sarah. More than we did against the Black Legion. Orcs don't use tactics. They use overwhelming numbers. Our mechs can kill hundreds, maybe thousands. But 12 million. He shook his head. The mathematics don't support survival. No, Davion agreed quietly. They don't. Which is why I came to talk to you about something I never thought I'd seriously consider. She pulled a data slate from her jacket and slid it across the desk. This is a formal request for political asylum. Drafted by Commandant Steiner with input from 3 House Davion legal advisors we have embedded with the fleet. It's addressed to the Fabricator General and formally requests that the Inner Sphere forces be granted protected refugee status under Imperial law, exempting us from mandatory combat deployments. Con Ward stared at the slate without touching it. Asylum. We're warriors, Sarah. Soldiers who chose this life. Asking for protection like civilians fleeing a war zone. is pragmatic survival instead of pointless death. Davion's voice cracked with barely controlled emotion. Khan, we've lost 7 mech warriors in 6 weeks. 7 irreplaceable pilots who will never go home. And for what? To prove we can fight and die alongside fanatics who worship a corpse on a golden throne? To earn the respect of a civilization that views individual lives as ammunition expenditure? We made an agreement. An agreement made under duress, with guns to our heads and the threat of orbital bombardment if we refused. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. I've been talking to the surviving mech warriors. Morale is collapsing. They're starting to realize we're not going home. That the fabricator general's calculations will take years, maybe decades. That we're going to be ground down battle by battle until there's nothing left but scrap metal and memorial plaques. Con Ward finally picked up the data slate and read the carefully worded request. It was, he had to admit, well crafted. It acknowledged the inner sphere's value as allies, while requesting exemption from front-line combat in exchange for technical consultation and training services. It would allow them to survive, while still providing value to the Imperium. It would also brand them as cowards in the eyes of every Imperial commander who had fought beside them. If we submit this, Con Ward said slowly, we lose every shred of respect we've earned. The Imperials will view us as broken warriors who couldn't handle real warfare. Princeps Thalios will categorize us as useless. And Inquisitor Valen will have the justification he's been looking for to recommend our purge. Not as a threat, but as dead weight unworthy of the Imperium's resources. I know. Davion's voice was hollow. But the alternative is watching more of our people die in a war that isn't ours. Fighting for an empire that doesn't care if we live or die. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the Forge world churned with activity as the Legio Metallica prepared for deployment. Tech priests blessed weapons. Guardsmen loaded transports. Sisters of battle prayed for martyrdom in the Emperor's service. The entire Imperium was a machine designed to wage eternal war, and the inner sphere had become just another cog in that machine. We don't submit the asylum request, Con Ward said finally. Not yet. We deploy to Galleon, we fight the orcs, and we survive. But Sarah, he met her eyes. If the casualties keep mounting at this rate, if it becomes clear we're being deliberately expended, then we reassess. We might have to break our agreement with the Fabricator General and take our chances finding our own way home. That's desertion, in the middle of an active war zone, with an Inquisitor watching our every move. Davion's laugh was bitter. They'll hunt us to the ends of the galaxy. Maybe. But we're warriors of the inner sphere, not Imperial slaves. There's a line between pragmatic cooperation and accepting our own destruction. I just hope we recognize it before we've crossed too far over. The transit to the Galleon sector took 12 days through the warp, 12 days of nightmares and reality distortion that even the inner sphere's Geller fieldless vessels struggled with, though the Imperial escort ships' fields provided some protection. When they finally emerged into real space above the world designated Galleon Prime, Con Ward understood why the Imperials treated this as routine. The planet below was already burning. Vast swathes of the primary continent were aflame from orc artillery bombardment. The capital Hive City was under siege, its void shields flickering as orc gargants, massive war machines that were the Xenos equivalent of Titans, pounded it with weapons that defied engineering logic, but worked through sheer orcish belief. And in orbit, debris fields marked where the Imperial Navy had fought a desperate battle to maintain Space superiority. Emperor's teeth, breathed Commandant Steiner, staring at the tactical display. The entire planet is a war zone. Welcome to Xenos warfare. Princeps Thalios' voice carried across the command channel from the Ferris wheel. Orcs don't conquer, they infest. Every orc killed releases spores that will grow into more orcs within months. The only way to truly cleanse a world is to burn it down to bedrock and salt the earth with promethium. Since Gallium Prime produces 20% of this sector's food supply, that's not an option. So we kill orcs until their way breaks and they scatter into the wilderness. Then we kill them again in 15 years when they've regrown enough to cause problems. That's insane, Star Captain Marissa muttered over the company channel. You're describing an eternal war that can never be won. Now you understand the Imperium. Sister Superior Celestine's voice carried dark amusement. We don't fight to win. We fight to survive until tomorrow, so we can fight again. Welcome to the 42nd Millennium, Inner Sphere. This is what forever war looks like. The deployment was a nightmare of logistics. The Legio Metallica maniple, 3 Titans and supporting elements, made planetfall in the industrial sector north of the capital hive. The Inner Sphere battle mechs deployed alongside 6 regiments of Imperial Guard Cadian shock troops. The objective was brutally simple. Push through 20 kilometers of Orc-held territory, break the siege artillery positions, and allow Imperial reinforcements to relieve the hive city. 20 kilometers, millions of Orcs. And the Inner Sphere was the vanguard. All battle mech units, this is Con Ward. Remember your training. Orcs are numerous but primitive. Maintain firing discipline, conserve ammunition, and for the love of all you hold sacred, don't let them close to melee range. An orc in hand-to-hand combat is worth 10 with guns. Keep them at distance and we survive. Close quarters and we die. Clear? 18 confirmations came back, but Con Ward could hear the uncertainty in some voices. These were mech warriors trained for honorable combat, limited engagements, battles with defined objectives. What they were about to face was industrial-scale slaughter with no endpoint except mutual exhaustion. The Orcs didn't keep them waiting. The attack came within minutes of the Inner Sphere forces establishing their staging area. A tide of green skin and crude metal that poured from the ruins ahead, like a living avalanche. Con Ward's tactical sensors registered thousands of contacts in the first wave alone. Thousands more behind them, and more still beyond visual range, moving toward the sound of battle with the single-minded determination of creatures that existed only to fight. All units, open fire. 18 battle mechs unleashed hell. Autocannons roared, shredding Orcs by the dozens. Long-range missiles arced overhead and detonated in the packed formations, turning dozens more into flying meat. Lasers carved through crude armor and green flesh with equal efficiency. In the first 30 seconds, the Inner Sphere Company killed over 200 Orcs. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The Orcs charged through their own dead without hesitation. They fired back with weapons that should have exploded in their hands, ramshackle guns held together with wire and hope. But that actually worked, because the Orcs believed they would. Their war boss, a creature 3 meters tall and built like a fusion reactor with anger issues, wielded a power claw that could tear through battle mech armor and roared challenges in broken Gothic that somehow translated to, "Come and fight me, you cowardly gits." A Davion enforcer made the mistake of engaging the war boss directly. The Orc closed the distance with terrifying speed, dodged the mech's autocannon fire through sheer impossible luck, and leapt onto the enforcer's leg. Its power claw activated with a sound like thunder, and in 3 strikes, It had severed the mech's knee actuator. The enforcer toppled. The war boss planted its foot on the fallen machine's head and raised its power claw in victory. Wah! 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 Every orc on the battlefield took up the cry. The sound was physically painful, a psychic resonance that somehow made them fight harder, faster, more effectively. Con Ward felt it even through his sealed cockpit, a pressure against his consciousness that whispered one word over and over. Kill. 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 Focus fire on the war boss, he commanded, forcing his voice to remain steady. Take it down now. 5 battle mechs concentrated fire on the massive orc. Autocannons cratered its crude armor. Lasers burned through muscle. Long-range missiles detonated across its body. The war boss took damage that would have killed a dozen men and kept fighting, kept roaring, kept inspiring its horde to impossible acts of violence. Then the Reaver Titan Ferris Will stepped into firing position and settled the matter with a single turbo laser shot that vaporized the war boss and 50 orcs standing nearby. The orc charge faltered. Not from fear, they were incapable of that, but from confusion. Their leader was dead. The psychic gestalt that bound them together had been disrupted. For 10 precious seconds, they milled about in disorder. All forces, advance. Princeps Thalios's command was absolute. Push while they're disorganized. The combined Imperial force surged forward, Titans and battlemechs at the front, Imperial Guard infantry following in their shadow. They carved through the confused orcs like a chainsaw through flesh. For 20 minutes, it was a slaughter. The Inner Sphere Company killed thousands. The Titans killed tens of thousands. The Imperial Guard mopped up survivors with practiced efficiency. Then a new war boss emerged from the horde, killed 3 of its rivals in hand-to-hand combat to establish dominance, and the orcs rallied. The battle continued for 6 hours. 6 hours of sustained combat that would have been unthinkable in the Inner Sphere, where major engagements lasted minutes or hours at most. 6 hours of killing orcs by the thousands, while more poured in to replace them. 6 hours of watching ammunition counters drop toward 0. Heat gauges climb toward critical, and armor integrity percentages tick steadily downward. Star Captain Marissa's Direwolf ran out of autocannon ammunition after the 3rd hour and switched to pure energy weapons, her fusion reactor running so hot that her cockpit temperature reached dangerous levels. Commandant Steiner's Zeus lost its left leg to an orc demolition team that managed to plant explosives on the knee joint, forcing him to operate the 70-ton machine on manual gyro control just to stay upright. Colonel Davion's Atlas killed over 3,000 orcs personally, its AC-20 firing until the barrel glowed red hot and the ammunition bay ran dry, forcing her to resort to her backup medium lasers and physical attacks, actually stomping orcs flat under the 100-ton machine's feet. And through it all, the Titans stood like gods, their weapons never seeming to run dry, their armor never faltering, their presence the only thing standing between the Imperial forces and total annihilation. When the orcs finally broke, not from casualties, but from simple exhaustion. The sun setting and the psychic gestalt telling them to rest and fight again tomorrow. Con Ward counted the cost. 2 more battle mechs destroyed. A House Davion Hunchback, whose ammunition bay had been penetrated by an orc rocket, causing a catastrophic explosion that killed the pilot instantly. A Clan Wolf Kit Fox that had been swarmed by 100 orcs simultaneously, torn apart by crude tools and brutal strength, its pilot beaten to death inside the cockpit. 6 more battle mechs damaged beyond field repair, requiring transit back to Metallica for major reconstruction. 11 mech warriors dead or wounded. And ahead of them, tomorrow, the same battle. And the day after. And the day after that. until either the orcs were dead or the Imperial force was. This was what Sister Superior Celestine had tried to warn him about. This was the reality of the 42nd millennium. Warfare wasn't a series of battles building toward victory. It was an endless meat grinder that consumed soldiers by the millions, where survival to the next engagement was the only victory that mattered. As Con Ward climbed out of his Timberwolf's cockpit and looked across the field of carnage, tens of thousands of orc corpses already being burned by Imperial Munitorum work crews, his own dead being wrapped in whatever served as shrouds, Sister Superior Celestine walked over to him. Her power armor spattered with orc blood, and her face serene despite having fought for 6 straight hours. "You understand now," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "We can't sustain this," Con Ward replied, too exhausted to maintain diplomatic pretense. "At this rate, we'll be combat ineffective within a month, dead within 2. Then you have 3 choices." Celestine counted them on armored fingers. "First, accept that this is your life now. Fight until you die, secure in the knowledge that your sacrifice delays humanity's extinction by perhaps a single day. Second, request that asylum your Colonel Davion drafted. Become non-combatants and live with the shame and the hatred of every Imperial who bled while you hid. Third." She paused, her eyes boring into his. "You run. You take your ships, you flee into unknown space, and you hope the Inquisition doesn't hunt you down. I've seen desperate people try all 3. I'll let you guess which one survived longest." Con Ward wanted to argue, wanted to find a 4th option, some clever solution that would preserve both their honor and their lives. But exhaustion and brutal honesty won out. "What would you do, sister, if you were in my position?" Celestine smiled sadly. "I'd pray. I'd beg the Emperor to show me the path. I'd trust that my suffering had meaning in his grand design." She looked out over the field of corpses. "But you don't have faith, Con Ward. You have honor, courage, and skill. In this galaxy, without faith to sustain you, those things will get you killed. Not quickly, not easily. But eventually, inevitably, they will break you." She walked away, leaving Con Ward standing alone among the dead, facing the terrible truth the inner sphere had been avoiding since they'd first arrived in this nightmare future. They were going to have to choose between their principles and their survival, between dying with honor in a war that would forget them instantly, or living with shame in a galaxy that offered no other options. And the longer they waited to make that choice, the fewer of them would survive to live with the consequences. In the grim darkness of the far future, the inner sphere was learning its harshest lesson yet. Sometimes there was no right choice, only degrees of wrong, and warriors from a civilization that still believed in honor would have to decide which wrong they could live with, or die refusing to accept. The breaking point came on the 13th day of the Gallian campaign. Con Ward stood in what remained of the command tent, half collapsed from an orc artillery strike that had killed 3 Cadian staff officers, and stared at the casualty reports with the hollow eyes of a man who had watched too many comrades die. The numbers were clinical, precise, utterly damning. Inner sphere forces. Day 13. Status report: original deployment, 18 battlemechs, 18 mech warriors, current operational, 9 battlemechs, 11 mech warriors, KIA, 7 mech warriors, catastrophic equipment loss, 9 battlemechs, irreparable. Estimated combat effectiveness, 31% of original capacity. Orc casualties inflicted, 47,000 estimated. Orc forces remaining, 11.4 million estimated. 50% casualties in less than 2 weeks. In the inner sphere, that would have triggered immediate withdrawal and unit reconstitution Here, it was simply noted in the daily briefing with the observation that acceptable attrition rates continue. Colonel Davion entered the tent, and Con Ward barely recognized her. Her uniform was stained with blood, some hers, some belonging to a mech warrior she'd tried to pull from a burning cockpit yesterday. Her eyes carried the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much death and knew more was coming. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Privately." They walked to the perimeter of the Imperial encampment, far enough that surveillance servitors wouldn't overhear. Davion pulled out a data slate and handed it to Con Ward. On it was a map showing their current position, the orc lines, and something else. A trajectory leading away from the battlefield, toward the system's edge. "Commandant Steiner has been running calculations," Davion said quietly. "Our dropships still have fuel. The jump ships are still functional, if we can reach them. There's a window, Con. 48 hours from now, during the next major push when the Titans are committed on the opposite flank. We could extract our remaining forces, reach orbit, and be at the jump point before the Imperials could organize pursuit." Con Ward stared at the map, understanding immediately what she was suggesting. Desertion. Abandoning their agreement with the Fabricator General. Running from a war that was eating them alive. "Inquisitor Valen would hunt us," he said automatically. "Let him try. The warp is infinite. One small fleet could disappear into the void and never be found. We could search for a way home on our own terms, without being ground down battle by battle." Davion's voice carried desperate hope. "Con, we've proven ourselves. We've bled for the Imperium. We've earned the right to say, enough. No one could question our courage after what we've endured. Everyone would question our honor." Con Ward handed back the data slate. "The moment we run, we become oathbreakers, cowards who abandoned allies in combat. Every warrior tradition we've ever held sacred says this is unacceptable." "Fuck honor." Davion's voice cracked, loud enough that nearby Imperial guardsmen turned to stare. She lowered her voice, but the fury remained. "Honor doesn't resurrect the dead, Con. It doesn't bring back Jacobson or Martinez or Chen or any of the others who died because we were too proud to admit we were in over our heads. I'm a soldier, not a martyr. And I'm not going to watch more of my people die for an empire that views them as expendable resources. We made an agreement, under duress, at gunpoint. That agreement isn't binding by any legal or moral standard." Davion grabbed his arm, her grip desperate. "Con, please, I'm begging you. Clan honor says a warrior fights to the death. House Davion honor says a commander protects her troops. Right now, those two codes are in direct conflict. Choose which matters more, dying gloriously, or getting our people home alive." Con Ward pulled his arm free, his face a mask of clan discipline barely containing the turmoil beneath. "I'll consider it. That's all I can promise." Davion's expression went cold. "Then I'll make the decision easier. I'm taking my surviving Davion mech warriors and pulling out in 48 hours, with or without Clan Wolf, with or without you. I've already spoken to my pilots. They're unanimous. We're done bleeding for fanatics. If you want to stay and die for your precious honor, that's your choice. But I'm not sacrificing any more of my people on the altar of clan pride." She walked away, leaving Con Ward standing alone at the perimeter, watching orc campfires flicker in the distance while the weight of command crushed down on him like a collapsing building. The conversation with Star Captain Marissa that evening was even worse. They met in the maintenance bay, where her dire wolf was being repaired, or what passed for repair, when every available resource was being poured into keeping the Titans operational. A tech thrall with dead eyes welded armor plates while chanting prayers to the Omnissiah. Marissa sat on an ammunition crate, cleaning her sidearm with mechanical precision. "You've heard about Davion's plan," Khan Ward said. Not a question. "Every mech warrior in the company has heard. The question is whether you're going to let her dishonor us all by running." Marissa's voice carried the cold certainty of pure clan ideology. Clan Wolf does not retreat, does not break faith, does not abandon allies who fight beside us, no matter how brutal the battle. Even when that battle is unwinnable, even when staying means dying for nothing. There is no such thing as dying for nothing if you die with honor. Marissa slammed the pistol down on the crate. "Khan, I've watched you struggle with this for days. I've seen you questioning every decision, doubting every sacrifice. That's not clan thinking. That's freebirth thinking, caring more about survival than glory." The insult was deliberate, chosen to sting. In clan culture, freebirth was the ultimate condemnation, someone who valued life over honor, who would retreat rather than die, who embodied everything the clans had been created to oppose. Maybe the freebirths had the right idea, Khan Ward said quietly, and watched Marissa's face go white with shock. Maybe valuing survival over meaningless death is why they've survived for 1,000 years, while the clans have been locked in eternal war. Maybe honor without pragmatism is just suicide with extra steps. You don't believe that. Marissa stood, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. You're Clan Wolf. You're Khan. You were raised in the warrior tradition. You can't simply abandon everything you are because the fighting got hard. 7 of our people are dead, Marissa. 7 warriors who trusted me to lead them well. And for what? We've killed 50,000 orcs out of 12 million. Our contribution is statistically irrelevant. The Imperium would barely notice if we disappeared tomorrow. But those 7 mech warriors' families would notice. The pilots still alive would notice. And I have to decide if abstract honor is worth more than their actual lives. Marissa's expression shifted from shock to something approaching pity. You've been compromised. This galaxy has broken you. The Khan Alaric Ward I knew would never question whether honor mattered more than life. The answer was always yes, always. Because without honor, life is just existence. Just survival, just animal. Then maybe I needed to be broken, Khan Ward replied. Maybe the old clan certainties don't apply in a galaxy where warfare is measured in billions dead and battles that literally never end. Maybe. The tent's entrance flew open and Commandant Steiner burst in, his face flushed with exertion. Khan, Colonel, immediate command briefing. The Imperials know. Khan Ward's blood went cold. Know what? About the extraction plan. Someone talked, or they monitored communications, or Inquisitor Valen has been reading our thoughts with psychic bullshit. Doesn't matter. Princeps Thalios just ordered all Inner Sphere command staff to the Titan Ferris Will for strategic consultation. Right now. With an armed Skitarii escort to ensure we attend. The 3 officers exchanged glances. This was it. The moment where they either faced the consequences of their planned desertion or tried to fight their way out of an Imperial encampment surrounded by enemies on all sides. Where's Colonel Davion? Khan Ward asked. Already being escorted to the Titan. She tried to argue. They didn't care. Steiner's voice carried grim certainty. Khan, if they execute her as a deserter, we need to decide right now whether we're fighting the Imperials or accepting whatever judgment they impose. Marissa's hand was already on her sidearm. If they harm her, we fight. Honor demands it. Fighting means dying. Steiner countered. There are 3 Titans, 6 Imperial Guard regiments, and a company of Sisters of Battle in this camp. We have 9 damaged battle mechs and 11 exhausted pilots. The math is brutally simple. Con Ward made his decision in the heartbeat between one breath and the next. We go to the meeting, unarmed. We face whatever comes. But if they threaten execution, we fight our way out or die trying. Agreed? 2 nods of acknowledgement. Not enthusiastic agreement, but the acceptance of warriors who knew they were walking into a trap with no good options. The walk to the Reaver Titan took 15 minutes through an Imperial camp that had gone suddenly, ominously quiet. Guardsmen watched them pass with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Tech priests whispered in binary cant that their translation software couldn't fully decode. Sisters of Battle stood at attention, their weapons held in funeral guard position, a stance typically reserved for escorting the condemned. The interior of Ferris Will was a cathedral of machinery and wrath. Every surface was inscribed with prayers to the Omnissiah. Massive ammunition feeds ran like arteries through the walls. The air thrummed with barely contained power from the Titan's plasma reactor. And at the center, in what could only be called a throne room, stood the judges of their fate. Princeps Thalios sat in his command throne, still partially integrated with the Titan systems, his eyes glowing with divine light. Fabricator General Xylanus appeared via hololith projection from Metallica, his 7 red eyes burning with cold calculation. Inquisitor Valen stood to one side, his bolt pistol drawn and held casually, a promise of immediate execution if required. And Sister Superior Celestine knelt before a makeshift shrine, praying quietly, but with hands positioned to reach her weapons in an instant. Colonel Davion was already there, standing at rigid attention between 2 Skitarii guards. Her face was carefully neutral, but Con Ward saw the tension in her shoulders, the posture of someone preparing for violence. Inner Sphere Command Staff is assembled, Princeps Thalios announced, his voice resonating through the Titan's internal speakers. We will now address the matter of attempted desertion during active military operations. We haven't deserted, Con Ward said immediately. We're still here, still fighting. Whatever intelligence you've received is premature. Don't insult us with lies. Inquisitor Valen's voice carried absolute authority. We've monitored your communications since the day you arrived. We know about the extraction plan, the trajectory calculations, the 48-hour window. The only question is whether this was idle desperation or actual intent to violate your agreement with the Mechanicus. Silence stretched. Con Ward realized they'd been played from the beginning, every private conversation monitored, every desperate contingency plan noted and filed. The Imperials had been waiting to see if the Inner Sphere would actually go through with desertion or if the planning was merely stress response. It was desperation, Colonel Davion said finally, her voice level. But it was also real intent. We're losing 50% casualties every 2 weeks. At this rate, we'll be extinct before the orcs are even significantly depleted. Any rational commander would plan for extraction under those circumstances. Rationality. Fabricator General Xylanus' mechanical choir voice dripped with contempt. You speak of rationality, as if warfare in this galaxy operates on rational principles. It does not. The Imperium holds millions of worlds through sheer refusal to accept defeat, through willingness to sacrifice billions so that trillions might survive, through understanding that there are fates worse than death, specifically, the extinction of humanity itself. You don't understand, Commandant Steiner interjected, his diplomatic training asserting itself. In the inner sphere, we fight wars to win. We have victory conditions, end states, logical conclusions. This, he gestured toward the battlefield outside. This is just endless slaughter. There's no winning, only dying slower or faster. You can't expect us to embrace that without question. Why not? Sister Superior Celestine spoke for the first time, rising from her prayers. Every Imperial citizen embraces it. Every guardsman knows they'll likely die in service. Every Space Marine accepts that their life belongs to the Emperor. Every tech priest understands that their biological existence is secondary to the Omnissiah's will. You are human. You serve humanity. Therefore, you serve the Imperium. Your personal survival is irrelevant compared to that duty. Our survival is not irrelevant to us. Star Captain Marissa's voice rang out, her clan pride finally breaking through discipline. We're not mindless servitors. We're warriors with families, histories, oaths of our own. You can't simply decree that our lives belong to your empire. We can, Inquisitor Valen said flatly. And we do. The question is whether you accept that reality or force us to impose it through violence. His bolt pistol came up, not quite aimed, but unmistakably ready. Choose now. Submit to Imperial authority, accept that your survival is conditional on service, and live to fight another day. Or refuse, and we execute you as enemy combatants who infiltrated Imperial lines under false pretenses. The moment crystallized into perfect clarity. Khan Ward saw the trap they'd fallen into with brutal completeness. The Imperials had never intended to help them get home. The calculations were a carrot dangled to extract technology and military service. They'd been prisoners from the moment they agreed to the Fabricator General's original deal, just prisoners who were still useful enough to keep alive. They had three options: submit and accept permanent servitude, fight and die immediately, or there's a fourth option, Khan Ward said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a warrior who had finally, definitively, made his choice. We fight alongside you. We bleed alongside you. We prove our value beyond question. And when this campaign ends, when the orcs are broken and Galleon Prime is secure, you grant us one favor, one chance. You provide us the resources to attempt one calculated warp jump back to our point of origin. If it fails, we die trying. If it succeeds, you lose auxiliary forces you barely need. Either way, the Imperium wins. Princeps Thalios leaned forward in his throne, the Titan's manifold systems echoing his interest. You would fight to the end of this campaign? Accept full casualties if necessary, just for one unguaranteed attempt at return? Yes, Khan Ward replied without hesitation. Because that's better than dying here for nothing, and better than living as your permanent slaves. We'll earn that chance through blood. But we will have it. That's the only term under which we continue service. The judges exchanged glances, biological, hololithic, and augmetic eyes meeting in silent communication. Finally, Fabricator General Zylanis spoke. Acceptable, with conditions. You fight until campaign completion. You provide full technical cooperation during that time. You accept tactical direction from Legio Metallica Command. And in exchange, we will attempt one warp translation to your temporal, spatial origin point. Success rate estimated at 17%. Failure will likely result in fleet obliteration, temporal dissolution, or displacement to an even less favorable reality. These odds are acceptable? They're better than zero, Colonel Davion said quietly. We accept. Then we have a revised agreement. Zelanis's 7 eyes pulsed. Inquisitor, release them, Their doubt was understandable if heretical. Their renewed commitment is acceptable if grudging. We will monitor their performance. Any sign of actual desertion will result in immediate orbital purge. Understood? Perfectly, Khan Ward replied. As the Inner Sphere delegation was escorted from the Titan, Inquisitor Valen fell into step beside Khan Ward. His voice was low, meant only for Khan's ears. You think you've won some concession. You think you've negotiated a fair deal. But understand this, Khan Ward. The Imperium doesn't make fair deals. We make offers where even the victory condition serves our purposes. You'll fight until this campaign ends, suffering casualties that will cripple your force. Then we'll attempt your warp translation, and when it inevitably fails, we'll have extracted everything useful from you before you die screaming in the immaterium. Your people will be obliterated, your technology will belong to Mars, and your names will be forgotten. That is the only future that awaits you. Khan Ward met the Inquisitor's gaze without flinching. Maybe, but at least we'll die trying to go home rather than dying as your slaves. Sometimes the manner of death is the only victory left to claim. Valen's expression flickered with something that might have been respect before hardening back into contempt. Then die well, Inner Sphere. The galaxy won't notice. That night, the Inner Sphere command staff gathered in what remained of their quarters. The mood was grim but resolved. The desperate energy of people who had accepted that death was coming and were determined to dictate its terms. 17%, Commandant Steiner said, reviewing the odds. That's a hell of a long shot. Better than 0, Colonel Davion repeated. And better than the alternative. She looked at Khan Ward. You surprised me. I thought you'd die before compromising clan honor. Clan honor says a warrior fights for their people, Khan Ward replied quietly. I'm fighting for ours, fighting to give them one last chance at home. If that requires making deals with monsters and accepting unacceptable odds, so be it. We're warriors of the Inner Sphere. We adapt, we survive, and we never give up, even when the galaxy tells us we should. Star Captain Marissa had been silent throughout, processing the weight of what they'd agreed to. Finally, she spoke. How many more will we lose before this campaign ends? All of us, probably. Khan Ward said with brutal honesty. The math doesn't support any other conclusion, but we'll make those deaths count. Every orc we kill is one less threatening humanity. Our humanity back in the Inner Sphere, if we ever make it home. And if we don't, he paused. If we don't, at least we'll have proven that humans from a timeline without the Emperor's light could still fight like heroes when it mattered. That's a cold comfort, Marissa muttered. It's the only comfort this galaxy offers. Sister Superior Celestine's voice came from the entrance. She'd followed them, uninvited but apparently tolerated by the guards. You're learning. Too slowly, perhaps, but learning. The 42nd Millennium doesn't reward hope or honor or courage. It only rewards the willingness to pay whatever price survival demands. She stepped forward, and for the first time, the Inner Sphere officers saw something approaching genuine sympathy in her eyes. I'll pray for your souls, for your survival, and for your journey home if the Emperor wills it. I don't expect you to understand why faith matters. But know this. You've earned respect few outsiders ever achieve. Fight well in the days ahead. Die better. And if by some miracle you do make it home, remember us. Remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, humanity still fights, still endures, still refuses to accept extinction, no matter the cost. She made the sign of the Aquila and departed, leaving the Inner Sphere delegation alone with their impossible mission. Survive the Gallian campaign, earn their one chance at home, and somehow beat 17% odds. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Inner Sphere had made their choice. Now they just had to live or die with the consequences. The final assault on the Orc positions came 37 days after the Inner Sphere's arrival on Gallian Prime. 37 days of grinding attrition that had reduced Khan Ward's company from 18 battle mechs to 4 operational machines and 7 surviving mech warriors. The mathematics of their destruction had been brutal and precise. 1 mech destroyed every 4 days, 1 pilot killed every 5, casualties mounting with mechanical inevitability toward total annihilation. But they'd held, they'd fought, and they'd killed orcs by the tens of thousands. Now, standing in the pre-dawn darkness of what Imperial Command promised would be the final push, Khan Ward looked at what remained of his force and felt something between pride and despair. His own Timberwolf was held together by emergency welds and prayers to gods he didn't believe in. Colonel Davion's Atlas had lost its signature AC-20 and was operating on medium lasers and whatever ammunition they'd scavenged from destroyed mechs. Star Captain Marissa's Direwolf was missing its entire right side. The fusion reactor held in place by structural braces that violated every safety protocol in the Inner Sphere technical manual. Commandant Steiner piloted a salvaged Centurion, not even his original mech, but cobbled together from 2 different wrecks. 4 battle mechs, 7 pilots rotating shifts, against what remained of Gutmangla. Approximately 400,000 orcs dug into the ruins of an industrial complex that controlled the approaches to the capital hive. All forces. This is Princeps Thalios. The voice boomed across every channel with divine authority. Today we break the siege. Today we purge the Xenos filth from Gallian Prime. The Emperor watches. The Omnissiah judges. And we will not be found wanting. Legio Metallica, advance. 3 god machines began walking toward the Orc positions. The Reaver Ferris Will at the center, flanked by the 2 Warhound scouts. Behind them came 6 regiments of Imperial Guard. 30,000 soldiers who had been ground down from 60,000 at campaign start. Sisters of Battle marched in prayer formation, their faith literally radiating as a golden glow that pushed back the pre-dawn darkness. And ahead of everyone, as they'd been from the beginning, the 4 surviving Inner Sphere battle mechs took point. The expendable vanguard, the acceptable losses. The screening force that would draw fire so the truly valuable assets could achieve firing solutions. Khan Ward had long since stopped being angry about it. He'd progressed through anger, through despair, through resignation, and arrived finally at a cold acceptance that this was simply how the Imperium prosecuted war. Individuals didn't matter. Only the mission, only survival of the collective, only the eternal grinding calculus of acceptable attrition. The Orcs opened fire at maximum range. Crude artillery, massive guns welded together from scrap metal and Orc ingenuity, began lobbing shells the size of cargo containers toward the Imperial lines. Most missed. A few hit, and where they struck, soldiers died in clusters of screaming meat and shattered bone. All battle mech units, advance and suppress enemy artillery. Princeps Thalios commanded. You are authorized to expend all remaining ammunition. This is the final engagement. Final engagement. The words carried a double meaning Khan Ward chose not to dwell on. He pushed his Timberwolf forward at maximum safe speed, nothing left to conserve now, and began firing everything. Long-range missiles streaked toward Orc positions, extended-range lasers carved through crude fortifications. His remaining autocannon spoke with a voice like thunder. each shell finding targets that exploded in satisfying fireballs. The other 3 mechs matched his pace. They moved as a unit despite coming from different military traditions, despite the inner sphere's fractious politics, despite everything that should have kept them divided. Battle had forged them into something new. Not clan, not house, not even inner sphere in the old sense, but survivors who had learned to fight in hell and somehow refused to die. The orcs responded with the enthusiasm of creatures who existed only for warfare. They poured from their fortifications in a green tide, roaring their war cry, "Wah! Wah! Wah!" Crude vehicles, wagons held together with barbed wire and prayer to gods that actually listened because orcs believed so hard, raced toward the Imperial lines. Orc boys fired wildly, their shots hitting through impossible luck as much as aim. And at the center of it all, a new war boss emerged, this one even larger than the last, carrying a power claw that crackled with stolen Imperial technology. "We's gonna crump you good," the war boss bellowed in broken Gothic. "Ya humi gits fought proper, but now you die. Wah!" The war boss charged directly at Khan Ward's Timberwolf with the suicidal confidence of a creature that had fought 10,000 battles and somehow survived them all. Khan Ward fired everything he had, lasers, missiles, autocannon, and the war boss took hits that would have killed 100 normal orcs. It kept coming, its crude armor ablating, its green skin burning, its roar of challenge never faltering. 20 meters, 10, 5. The war boss leaped with impossible strength, its power claw raised to tear Khan Ward's cockpit open and kill him personally in glorious melee. Colonel Davion's Atlas stepped between them and caught the war boss mid-leap with a backhand that sent the creature tumbling. The 100-ton mech's fist, each finger the size of a grown man, came down on the orc with the inevitability of continental drift. Once, twice, 3 times. The war boss's armor cracked. Its skull caved in. Its roar of defiance ended in a wet gurgle. "No one kills my Khan except me." Davion's voice crackled over the company channel with dark humor. "You owe me a drink if we survive this, Ward." "When we survive this," Khan Ward corrected automatically. Never say if. The war boss's death broke something in the orc assault. Not their courage, they had none to break, but their coordination. The psychic gestalt that bound them fractured. Individual mobs began fighting each other for dominance even as the Imperial forces advanced. It was the opening Princeps Thalios had been waiting for. All Titans, weapons free. Purge them. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. 3 god machines opened fire with every weapon system simultaneously, and the orc positions simply ceased to exist. Turbo lasers carved canyons through their fortifications. Gatling blasters chewed through orc infantry like a harvester through wheat. Apocalypse missiles turned entire city blocks into fireballs that mushroomed into the dawn sky. The 4 inner sphere battle mechs contributed what they could, killing orcs that tried to flank, suppressing positions the Titans hadn't noticed, protecting Imperial Guard infantry as they advanced. They were mosquitoes alongside gods, but they were effective mosquitoes, and they refused to quit. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, 400,000 orcs were dead or scattered into the wilderness. The siege was broken. Gallian Prime was secured, and the inner sphere had survived against every mathematical probability that said they should have died weeks ago. Khan Ward climbed out of his Timberwolf's cockpit and collapsed on the ground, too exhausted to stand. Around him, the battlefield was a nightmare landscape of orc corpses, burning wreckage, and the wounded crying for medics or the Emperor's mercy, whichever came first. Imperial Guard soldiers moved among the dead, executing wounded orcs with methodical efficiency. Tech priests were already beginning salvage operations, claiming useful technology from the ruins. Colonel Davion limped over and collapsed beside him. Her face was gaunt, aged 10 years and 5 weeks. We did it. Emperor's blood, we actually did it. Don't invoke their emperor, Khan Ward muttered. Bad enough we fought for him. Let's not pretend we believe. Star Captain Marissa and Commandant Steiner joined them, both looking equally shattered. For a long moment, the 4 surviving command officers simply sat in the dirt, too tired to move, too stunned to process that they'd actually survived. Then, Princeps Thalios' voice boomed across the battlefield. Inner sphere forces, report to the Ferris Will immediately. The Fabricator General wishes to address you regarding completion of campaign obligations. The moment of rest ended. Duty, apparently, never did. Inside the Reaver Titan, Fabricator General Zelanis appeared via hololith, with his 7 red eyes burning brighter than Khan Ward remembered. Inquisitor Valen stood present in person, his expression unreadable. Sister Superior Celestine knelt in prayer before a hastily erected shrine, though Khan Ward suspected she was listening to every word. Inner Sphere Delegation. Zelanis began without preamble. Campaign completion confirmed. Galleon Prime secured. Orc threat reduced to manageable levels. Your performance was adequate. 18 battle mechs deployed. 4 survived. 14 mech warriors deployed to final assault. 7 survived. Your casualty rate of 61% is within acceptable Imperial Guard parameters. Acceptable, Colonel Davion repeated, her voice hollow. 11 of our people are dead. 11 families will never see their loved ones again. And you call it acceptable. I call it survival, Zelanis replied without emotion. In the 42nd millennium, acceptable means you live to fight tomorrow. Your fallen died in service to humanity's continued existence. They will be remembered in the Mechanicus archives. Their sacrifice has meaning. Their sacrifice has meaning to us, Khan Ward interrupted, his voice carrying steel. Which is why we're here to claim what you promised. One attempt at warp translation back to our origin point. We've paid the price you demanded. Now honor your agreement. Silence stretched. Zelanis' 7 eyes seemed to analyze Khan Ward from angles human eyes couldn't comprehend. Finally, the Fabricator General spoke. Agreement acknowledged. Mechanicus honor demands compliance. However, you must understand the risks. We have spent the campaign duration analyzing your vessel's original warp emergence signatures, calculating temporal displacement variables, and attempting to determine your reality's quantum coordinates. The mathematics are challenging. Your civilization appears to exist in a timeline where humanity's evolution diverged approximately 15,000 years ago. Returning you to that timeline requires punching through not just space, but time and probability itself. He pulled up a hololithic display showing equations that made Khan Ward's head hurt. Success probability, 17.3%. Probability of temporal dissolution, 42%. Probability of displacement to alternate hostile reality, 31%. Probability of simple annihilation, 9.7%. These odds are acceptable? They're better than staying here, Commandant Steiner said quietly. No offense to the Imperium, but we've seen enough of your eternal war. We want to go home, even if home means dying in the attempt. Inquisitor Valen stepped forward, his augmetic eye blazing. Before we proceed, I must conduct final purity assessment. Stand for inspection. What followed was the most invasive examination Con Ward had ever endured. Valen's augmetic eye scanned them with senses beyond normal perception, analyzing their souls for signs of chaos corruption, Xenos influence, or heretical thought. He questioned them about their experiences, their doubts, their moments of weakness in battle. He even drew blood samples, actual biological samples, to be tested for genetic markers of corruption. Finally, after 30 minutes that felt like hours, Valen stepped back. They're clean. Miraculously, impossibly clean. 5 weeks fighting chaos and orcs, and their souls show no taint. Either they possess some inherent resistance, or they're simply too ignorant to be corrupted. He holstered his bolt pistol. They're safe to release into the warp. If they survive, they won't spread corruption to whatever reality they reach. Then we proceed, Fabricator General Xylanus declared. Your vessels will be prepared for calculated warp translation. This will require 7 days for ritual preparation, plasma reactor blessing, and Geller field calibration. You will spend that time in quarantine. We cannot risk last-minute corruption compromising the attempt. Understood, Con Ward replied. Then, surprising himself, he added, Fabricator General, I have a request. Our dead, the 11 who didn't survive, we want to take them home, even if only as ashes. Can you? Cremation will be performed according to your specifications, Xylanus interrupted. The Omnissiah recognizes the value of honoring fallen warriors. Their remains will be prepared for transit. This is acceptable honor debt payment for services rendered. Something in Con Ward's chest unclenched slightly. At least their dead wouldn't be turned into servitors or industrial raw materials. At least they'd go home or into the warp trying, with their dignity intact. One more thing, Colonel Davion said. If this works, if by some miracle we make it home, what do we tell people about you? About the Imperium? About this nightmare future? Inquisitor Valen's expression went cold. You tell them nothing. You speak of your experience to no one. Because if you do, if you spread knowledge of chaos or the warp or the eternal war awaiting humanity in its future, you will doom your timeline to the same corruption that plagues ours. Ignorance is your civilization's greatest defense. Guard it jealously. And if they don't believe us anyway? Commandant Steiner asked. Then you'll sound like madmen, and no one will take you seriously. Continue 0018. Sister Superior Celestine said, rising from her prayers. Either way, the Emperor protects. Even timelines he never knew existed. She walked over to the Inner Sphere delegation and, to everyone's surprise, embraced each one in turn. You fought well. You survived against impossible odds. You never lost your humanity despite witnessing ours at its worst. If the Emperor wills your safe return, you'll carry my prayers with you. And if he does not, her expression hardened. Then die knowing you faced the galaxy's darkness and refused to break. That's more than most can claim. 7 days later, Con Ward stood on the bridge of the Pride of the Pack and watched the Mechanicus fleet complete their preparations. His surviving crew, barely 200 personnel from the original 800, had said their goodbyes to the Imperials they'd fought beside. Promises had been made that everyone knew were meaningless. We'll remember you. Your sacrifice mattered. The Imperium honors your service. Pretty lies that didn't change the fundamental truth. The moment they entered the warp, the Imperium would forget that they'd ever existed. They were a footnote in a war that measured time in millennia and casualties in billions. The 4 surviving battle mechs were secured in the dropship bays, repaired as much as Imperial technology and inner-sphere knowledge could manage. They'd never be the same. Too many improvised fixes, too many components replaced with Imperial equivalents, too many scars from battles that should have destroyed them. But they still functioned. Like their pilots, they'd survived. All vessels confirm Geller field activation, the Vox officer reported. Tech priest blessing rituals complete. Warp engine capacitors at maximum. We're ready for translation on your order, Khan. Khan Ward looked at Colonel Davion, who'd taken position beside him despite technically commanding a different vessel. She nodded. Commandant Steiner, coordinating from his own ship, confirmed readiness over the fleet channel. Star Captain Marissa, piloting the last functional Clan Wolf battlemech, transmitted simple acknowledgement. Sayla, whatever comes. This is Khan Alaric Ward to all Inner Sphere vessels. He broadcast on all channels. In 30 seconds, we attempt the impossible. We try to go home. We might succeed and wake up in the Inner Sphere, where we can tell our people about horrors they won't believe. We might fail and die in the warp, our atoms scattered across dimensions. Or we might end up somewhere even worse than here and have to start this nightmare all over again. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But regardless of outcome, know this. You fought like heroes. You survived what would have broken lesser warriors. You proved that humanity from a timeline without the Emperor's light could still stand against chaos, against Xenos, against the grinding horror of eternal war, and refuse to quit. Be proud of that. I am. He nodded to the Vox officer. Engage warp translation. Let's go home. The universe screamed. Space-time tore open in a wound that shouldn't exist, and the Inner Sphere fleet plunged into it. The warp embraced them with something between hatred and hunger, pulling them through dimensions where physics was optional and sanity was a liability. The Geller fields held barely, creating bubbles of reality in an ocean of madness. Through the viewports, Khan Ward saw things he knew would haunt his nightmares forever if he survived to have nightmares. Demons pressed against the Geller fields, their forms shifting through geometries human eyes weren't designed to process. Voices whispered promises of power, threats of damnation, offers of knowledge that would shatter minds. The warp itself seemed aware, malevolent, personally offended that these humans dared traverse its depths without offering worship to the dark gods. Geller field integrity at 70%. Someone reported through static corrupted Vox, 75, 80, holding steady. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into hours, into moments, into eternities. Khan Ward felt his consciousness begin to fragment, pulled in directions that didn't exist in sane reality. Beside him, Colonel Davion was screaming something, a prayer maybe, or a curse, or simply rage against the dying of the light. Then, with a sound like reality snapping back into place, they were through. The viewports showed stars, normal stars, constellations that tactical computers began analyzing, comparing to databases from the Inner Sphere's navigational records. For 30 seconds, no one dared speak, terrified that any sound would shatter the fragile hope that they'd actually succeeded. Then the navigation officer's voice, shaking with disbelief. Khan, I'm getting positional matches. These constellations, they're Inner Sphere space. We're in the Lyran Commonwealth, approximately 15 light-years from Tharkad. Date stamp. He paused, rechecking his instruments. Date stamp indicates we're in 3151. We're home. We're actually home. The bridge erupted in cheers. Crew members who had maintained perfect discipline through 5 weeks of hell suddenly collapsed. weeping or laughing or simply staring in stunned disbelief. Colonel Davion grabbed Con Ward in an embrace that crushed the air from his lungs. Over the fleet channel, Commandant Steiner was babbling something about miracles, while Star Captain Marissa's voice carried pure clan triumph. "Sayla, we did it. We actually did it." Con Ward allowed himself one moment of pure, unrestrained joy. They'd survived. Against 17% odds, against the might of the Imperium, against chaos and orcs and the warp itself. The inner sphere had made it home. Then reality reasserted itself. They were home, yes. But they were changed. Every surviving warrior carried scars, physical and psychological, from a war that had never happened in this timeline. They'd witnessed the future of humanity. A nightmare of eternal conflict where survival required abandoning everything that made the inner sphere recognize itself as civilized. And now, they had to decide what to do with that knowledge. "All ships, stand down from combat alert," Con Ward ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Begin standard identification protocols with Lyran Commonwealth Defense Forces. And someone get me a channel to House Steiner Command. We need to explain where we've been for the last 5 weeks, and they're not going to believe a word of it." As the fleet began sending identification codes and approaching the nearest inhabited system, Colonel Davion leaned close to Con Ward and whispered, "What do we tell them? The truth?" Con Ward thought of Inquisitor Valen's warning. "Ignorance is your greatest defense." He thought of Sister Superior Celestine's prayer that they'd carry her faith home. He thought of the 11 dead warriors whose ashes rested in the cargo bay, payment for passage home from a future that would have consumed them all. "We tell them we got lost in a warp storm anomaly," he said finally. "We fought unknown hostiles. We suffered casualties. We barely escaped. All technically true and vague enough that no one will believe the details even if we shared them. And the battle mech modifications? The Imperial tech grafted onto our machines? The changes in our combat doctrine? We say we improvised to survive, adapted our technology, learned hard lessons about mobile warfare." Con Ward's expression hardened. The future we saw, the Imperium, the Eternal War, the Emperor's nightmare galaxy. That's not something we share. That's something we prevent. We use what we learned to make the inner sphere stronger, to ensure that in 15,000 years, humanity doesn't end up like the fanatics we left behind. You think we can change the future just by knowing about it? I think we have to try. Con Ward looked out at the stars of the inner sphere. His home, his people, his responsibility. The Imperium fights for survival. We fight for something better. That's the difference between us and them. And Blake willing, it always will be. As the pride of the pack began its final approach to Tharkad, Con Ward allowed himself one last thought about the galaxy they'd left behind. About Fabricator General Xylanus and his hunger for lost technology. About Princeps Thalios and his cold calculation of acceptable losses. About Sister Superior Celestine and her unshakable faith in a dying empire. They would continue fighting, continue bleeding, continue grinding through eternal war until the heat death of the universe or the final triumph of chaos, whichever came first. They were humanity's future, and that future was hell. But it didn't have to be the inner sphere's future. Not if Con Ward and his surviving warriors had anything to say about it. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But in the inner sphere of 3151, there was still hope. And that made all the difference. 3 months after their return, Khan Ward stood in the Hall of Remembrance on Strana Mekti, the clan homeworld, and stared at the newly inscribed names of the fallen. 11 warriors who had died in a war that officially never happened, fighting enemies that the Inner Sphere refused to acknowledge existed. The memorial listed them as casualties of unknown hostile contact during deep space operations. Bureaucratic language that said everything and nothing. The surviving mech warriors had scattered across the Inner Sphere after their debriefing. Some had returned to their units, trying to reintegrate into normal military life and failing. Others had resigned their commissions, unable to reconcile the Inner Sphere's civilized warfare with what they'd experienced in the 42nd Millennium. A few had disappeared entirely, unable to carry the weight of knowledge that would drive them mad if they spoke of it honestly. Khan Ward had spent the months writing reports that would be classified and buried, conducting interviews with intelligence officers who didn't believe half of what he said, and trying to sleep without dreaming of plague marines and demon engines and Sister Superior Celestine's eyes burning with faith in a corpse god. "You look like hell, Khan." He turned to find Colonel Sarah Davion approaching, civilian clothes marking her as officially retired from military service. She'd aged more than 3 months would account for. Stress and trauma had carved lines in her face that would never fade. "Couldn't sleep," Khan Ward admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, fighting orcs who won't die. Watching the Titans walk through our positions like we're not even worth noticing, hearing Inquisitor Valen tell us our lives are ammunition to be expended." Davion stood beside him, studying the memorial. "I got a message from Commandant Steiner yesterday. He's taken a position with Lyran Intelligence, analyzing the Imperial technology we brought back. Says he can't look at modern battle mech schematics without seeing how primitive we are. How vulnerable. If the Imperium ever came back through that warp rift, we'd last maybe a week before being crushed." "The Imperium's not coming," Khan Ward said with certainty he didn't entirely feel. "We're too far removed temporally, too insignificant to bother with. They have bigger concerns, like chaos trying to devour reality from within. Maybe." Davion pulled out a data slate and handed it to Khan Ward. "But I've been tracking something interesting. Remember how we brought back those 11 sets of ashes? Turns out 3 of the families requested genetic analysis. Wanted to confirm identity since we didn't have bodies to view." Khan Ward felt cold dread settle in his stomach. And the Lyran Genetic Registry found anomalies. Trace elements in the bone structure that don't match any known human exposure. Radiation signatures from isotopes that shouldn't exist in inner sphere space. DNA markers showing cellular stress consistent with... She paused, checking the slate. "Consistent with prolonged exposure to non-standard dimensional energy fields. The scientists don't know what to make of it, but they're calling it evidence of contact with unknown technology." "They can't prove anything," Khan Ward said, but his certainty was cracking. "No, but they're asking questions, and some of those questions are getting routed to intelligence agencies that take unknown dimensional energy very seriously." Davion's expression was grim. "Khan, what if we didn't leave the 42nd Millennium behind? What if we brought pieces of it home with us?" Before Khan Ward could respond, his comm unit chimed with an urgent priority message. He activated it to find Star Captain Marissa's face, pale with stress. "Khan, we have a situation. You need to get to the Clan Wolf Command Center immediately. There's something... You need to see this for yourself." The command center was in controlled chaos when Khan Ward arrived. Tactical displays showed a star system on the inner sphere's periphery. Deep space, barely explored, strategically insignificant. But every sensor in that system was screaming warnings. "What am I looking at?" Con Ward demanded. A technician pulled up the data stream. Unidentified contact detected 3 hours ago. Initial classification, natural phenomenon, possibly a micro-wormhole or quantum fluctuation. But then it started growing and emitting radiation signatures that match. He pulled up comparison data that made Con Ward's blood run cold. That matched the energy profiles from your classified after-action reports. "Con, this looks like a warp emergence." Impossible. But even as Con Ward said it, he knew it wasn't. The warp didn't follow rules. The warp was a dimension where time and space were suggestions, and causality was optional. If the Mechanicus's calculations had created a permanent weak point in reality. "It gets worse," Star Captain Marissa said, her voice tight. "We sent a remote probe to investigate. Got 10 seconds of data before the transmission cut out." She activated the playback. The probe's visual feed showed a tear in space that hurt to look at. Not the clean jump point transitions the inner sphere was familiar with, but a wound in reality that pulsed with sickly light. And through that wound, something was emerging. The image was corrupted, distorted, but unmistakable to anyone who had seen it before. The prow of a ship, not an inner sphere vessel, not even close. A Gothic cathedral of metal and malice, covered in script that writhed and changed when observed directly. Weapons batteries the size of city blocks, and emblazoned across its hull in 8-pointed stars and symbols that made the technician's eyes water. The mark of chaos. "Emperor's blood," Con Ward whispered, then caught himself. He'd sworn he'd never invoke that corpse god's name again. But old habits died hard when faced with proof that the nightmare had followed them home. "What do we do?" Marissa asked. "If that's really a chaos ship, if they found a way into our timeline, then the inner sphere faces a threat it can't possibly understand." Con Ward finished. "We need to warn everyone. Now. House Dovion, Clan Wolf, the Lyran Commonwealth, even the Draconis Combine. Every faction that has ever fought in the inner sphere needs to know that something worse than all of us combined is coming through that rift." "They won't believe us," Marissa protested. "We don't even have official recognition that we ever went to the 42nd Millennium. How do we convince them to mobilize against chaos when they don't even believe chaos exists?" Con Ward stared at the tactical display, watching the chaos vessel continue its emergence into inner sphere space. In the 42nd Millennium, the Imperium fought chaos with faith, with God machines, with the absolute conviction that humanity's survival justified any atrocity. The inner sphere had none of those things. What they had was technology, warrior codes, and the naive belief that warfare followed rules. It wouldn't be enough. Not against chaos. Not against corruption that could turn their own people against them from within. But it would have to be. Because the alternative was watching his civilization fall to the same darkness that had consumed humanity's future. "We convince them the same way we always have," Con Ward said finally. "We fight. We demonstrate the threat firsthand. We show them that there are things worse than house against house, clan against clan, and if necessary." He paused, making a decision he knew would haunt him forever. If necessary, we become the very thing we fought alongside in the 42nd Millennium. Fanatics who will do anything, sacrifice anything, to ensure humanity's survival, even if it costs us our souls. Marissa's expression hardened. "That's a dark path, Con. The Imperium's path." We swore we'd be better than them. We also swore to protect our people. Khan Ward pulled up files on the 4 surviving battle mechs, still bearing their Imperial modifications, still carrying traces of technology that shouldn't exist in this timeline. Those machines survived the 42nd Millennium. They fought Chaos Space Marines and Orcs and Demon engines. Maybe that makes them proof. Maybe that makes them our first line of defense. Maybe. Alarms throughout the command center screamed to life. A junior technician's voice cracked with panic. Contact! Multiple new signatures emerging from the rift. Classification, unknown. Size profiles consistent with escort vessels. Configuration, Emperor help us. They're launching fighters. The tactical display updated, showing smaller craft pouring from the Chaos ship like insects from a disturbed hive. Each one moved with impossible agility, their flight patterns violating basic physics. They were headed toward the nearest inhabited system, a minor colony world with 3 million civilians who had no idea what was coming for them. Deploy response forces, someone ordered. Get every available fighter, and they won't be enough. Khan Ward interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. I've seen what Chaos fighters can do. Our conventional forces will be slaughtered. We need the modified battle mechs. We need warriors who understand what we're facing. And we need to move now, before they reach that colony. Star Captain Marissa was already moving toward the bay doors. I'll prep my dire wolf. If we're doing this, we're doing it fast. Colonel Davion's voice crackled over Khan Ward's comm unit. She'd been monitoring the situation remotely. Khan, I'm coming out of retirement. If Chaos is here, you need every pilot who survived the 42nd Millennium. I'll have my Atlas combat ready in 6 hours. Commandant Steiner chimed in next. Lyran Intelligence is authorizing full mobilization. We don't understand what's happening, but we trust your assessment. What do you need? What did he need? Khan Ward looked at the tactical display showing Chaos vessels emerging into a timeline that had no defense against corruption, no faith to protect against demonic influence, no understanding of the horror that awaited. The inner sphere needed Titans, needed the Legio Metallica, needed Sister Superior Celestine and her absolute faith, needed an Imperium that, for all its brutality, had been fighting this war for 10,000 years and knew how to survive it. But all they had was 4 damaged battle mechs, 7 traumatized pilots, and the desperate hope that experience bought with 11 lives would be enough to make a difference. I need every warrior who fought in the 42nd Millennium assembled, Khan Ward said. I need command authority to engage the Chaos vessels before they reach civilian populations. And I need someone to start believing me when I say that the inner sphere just became the front line in a war that will make everything we've ever fought look like training exercises. He looked at the memorial to their fallen one last time, then turned toward the bay, where his Timberwolf waited. The machine was scarred, corrupted by Imperial modifications, barely functional by inner sphere standards. But it had survived the 42nd Millennium, and now it would have to survive defending the 32nd century against threats that shouldn't exist yet. All surviving Inner Sphere Expedition members, this is Khan Alaric Ward. He broadcast on encrypted channels. Emergency recall. Code designation, Galleon Prime. If you remember what that means, if you survived what we survived, report for immediate deployment. We have Chaos contacts in Inner Sphere space. Repeat, Chaos is here, and we're the only ones who know how to fight it. As he walked toward his battle mech, Khan Ward couldn't help but think of Inquisitor Valen's final warning. You'll doom your timeline to the same corruption that plagues ours. Maybe he'd been right. Maybe bringing knowledge of chaos back to the 32nd century had created the very threat they'd hoped to prevent. Maybe they'd infected their own timeline with darkness just by surviving. But they were warriors. They adapted. They survived. And now they'd proved that humanity from a timeline without the Emperor's light could still fight the long war, even if they had to learn its brutal lessons one battle at a time. Behind him, the memorial's inscription caught the light. They fought in hell so we might remain in heaven. Never forget their sacrifice. Khan Ward wouldn't forget. None of them would. And now, with chaos emerging into inner sphere space, that sacrifice would have to mean something more than memory. It would have to mean survival. For everyone. In the grim darkness of the far future, there had been only war. Now that war had reached backward through time, finding the inner sphere unprepared but not defenseless. The warriors who had survived the 42nd millennium would stand as humanity's first line of defense against corruption they barely understood. It wouldn't be enough, not permanently, but it would buy time. And in a galaxy where hope itself was heresy, time was the most valuable resource of all. The inner sphere's war against the impossible had just begun. And this time, they were writing their own rules. The legend of the Lost Fleet would grow in the years that followed, though the truth remained classified at the highest levels. Official records spoke only of a mysterious deep space incident, unexplained casualties, and warriors who returned changed. But among mech warriors across the inner sphere, stories circulated in hushed tones, tales of a timeline where humanity had become something simultaneously magnificent and monstrous, where god machines walked battlefields and faith was literal armor against corruption, where warriors fought for 10,000 years in an eternal war that consumed billions. Most dismissed the stories as combat trauma, fabrications born from stress, the ravings of soldiers who'd seen too much and cracked under pressure. But those who had been there, the 7 survivors, knew better. They carried scars, both visible and invisible, modifications to their battle mechs that violated inner sphere engineering standards, and knowledge that would drive lesser minds to madness. They'd witnessed humanity's future, a nightmare of industrial-scale warfare prosecuted by fanatics who had forgotten what they were fighting for, knowing only that stopping meant extinction. And now, they'd brought that future home. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably, because the warp cared nothing for human intentions and corruption spread like radiation. Invisible, insidious, impossible to fully contain. The rift that had opened on the inner sphere's periphery would be contained eventually. Chaos vessels would be destroyed by forces that didn't understand what they were truly fighting. And the survivors of Galleon Prime would become the nucleus of a secret organization. The Vigil, they called themselves. Warriors who understood the real threat awaiting humanity in its future and worked desperately to prevent that dark timeline from becoming inevitable. Khan Alaric Ward would lead them, though the title Khan rang hollow now. He'd seen true authority in Princeps Thalios's absolute command, in Fabricator General Zelanis's mechanical certainty, in Inquisitor Valen's terrifying power to order worlds burned on suspicion alone. Compared to that, inner sphere ranks seemed like children playing at military structure. But the inner sphere was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. Because for all its flaws, its petty house rivalries, its clan honor obsessions, its naive belief in civilized warfare, it still retained something the Imperium had lost somewhere in its long nightmare: humanity. The recognition that individual lives mattered. that warriors fought for more than mere survival, that hope was not heresy, but the very thing worth preserving. The 11 fallen would be remembered. Their families would mourn without ever knowing the true scale of what their loved ones had faced. And the survivors would carry that weight forever. The knowledge that they'd stood against the grim darkness of humanity's far future and survived long enough to warn the present. It wouldn't be enough to prevent the eventual fall. 15,000 years of history couldn't be altered by a handful of warriors with classified knowledge. But maybe, just maybe, they could delay it, could give the inner sphere tools to resist corruption when it inevitably came, could plant seeds of understanding that might blossom into defense mechanisms the Imperium had never developed because it had already fallen by the time the threat was recognized. Or maybe they'd fail. Maybe the rift would widen. Maybe chaos would infect the 32nd century the same way it had corrupted the 42nd millennium. Maybe humanity's nightmare future was inevitable, regardless of what a few traumatized warriors tried to prevent. But they'd try anyway, because that's what warriors did. They fought impossible odds. They stood against darkness. They refused to quit, even when every rational calculation said failure was certain. The Imperium of man fought for survival. The inner sphere fought for something better. That difference, that stubborn refusal to accept that brutality was humanity's only option, might be enough. Or it might not. Either way, the vigil had begun. And in the spaces between the stars, where the inner sphere met the unknown, warriors who had survived hell itself stood watch, ready to fight, ready to bleed, ready to die if necessary to ensure that humanity's future, their present's future, didn't have to be the nightmare they'd witnessed.